Hello, everyone. I am the true scary storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching right now? Get comfortable and relax. When Jade was only 12 years old, her father came home one afternoon with his arms and legs covered in claw marks. Jade felt confused and excited about his appearance. While she didn't like seeing her dad hurt, she wondered if he finally bought her the cat or dog she wanted. He wasn't good with animals, and she figured it must have attacked him on the car ride home. To Jade's dismay, he didn't dare hug her or call her his little troll, a nickname he gave her for the vibrantly colored hair extensions she always wore. He hurried into the bathroom and shut the door. Second time. "This isn't good at all," she heard him say through the door. "I have to." The rest of his words were muffled and eventually drowned out by the sound of blasting water from the shower. He had been acting strange for the past few weeks. This instance proved no exception. She wasn't particularly bothered by the late nights he spent at the office or the number of business trips he took to some faraway state. When he asked her to stop calling her dad one day and to call him Frank, she knew something was seriously wrong. She loved calling Frank dad, but Frank Butler insisted she was old enough. For a long time, Jade thought this had something to do with the divorce, but now she wasn't sure at all. When a few minutes lapsed into a half hour, Jade decided to call her friend Sasha about going to Hubbard Park, which was right down the far street from Frank's house. Jade wasn't supposed to use the house phone without permission, but she counted on him being in the bathroom for a while and had a few hours until her mom would stop by. She cautiously dialed Sasha's number, listening for any changes in sound from the bathroom. "Hey, Sash, what's up, JD Bean? Oh, God. That commercial is so old. Want to go to Hubbard?" "I guess. I thought you were with, what does he want you to call him again?" "Frank. He's so weird." "Ugh. So weird," Sasha repeated, laughing. "Yeah, I'll go. I got to go to drama club at 4, though. See you soon." "Okay, see ya." Jade left a note on the kitchen counter about her whereabouts and headed into the garage to grab her bike. As she stepped onto the concrete floor, she was surprised to find the interior vacant except for her blue Trek bike and a lone tool shelf. Before the divorce, the garage was full of sports equipment, gardening tools, and an extra fridge stocked with sports-themed beverages for when Frank coached her soccer team. Now, not only was the garage devoid of those remnants of her old life, but it was impeccably clean. Jade thought it was suspiciously clean. She figured he was in one of his moods again when she heard him shout, "This is disgusting." Whether it was due to work or another argument with her mom, she didn't want to know. She knew he couldn't keep his promise about a new cat or dog. Frank was full of broken promises, anger, and nothing more. She didn't even care how he got the claw marks anymore. All Jade knew as she rode off toward the park was that she barely recognized her dad or the house she once called home. Thankfully, Sasha breathed life into her otherwise disappointing day. She smiled as she pulled into the park and saw Sasha on her purple mountain bike. As she fixed her braids, Jade thought about how lucky Sasha was to have actual blue streaks. Clip extensions were the only hair alterations Frank approved of. He used to never care about hair or clothes, but now always had something to say when she stopped by. Jade's mom said he worried about her becoming a proper young lady. She didn't believe this at all. "JD Bean, you look like hell." "Gee, thanks, Sash. Chillax, I'm just saying. Wait, did your dad? I don't want to talk about it. Want to go to Castle Craig?" Sasha enthusiastically nodded as they rode to the trail, which was located on top of a hill in a gravel parking lot. The girls would often go to Castle Craig when the weather was nice or when they needed to clear their minds. They loved the hike because it crossed a pedestrian bridge over the busy freeway, which was fun to look down on, and the views from the stone castle as well as the Trap Rock mountain ridge were magnificent. From those heights, the girls could see all of Meriden, which the girls loved but made them a little sad, as they would both be moving in a matter of months. Jade was beginning to wonder, however, if she'd be better off living further away from The man she used to call Dad. "Did you hear about the two girls that disappeared last month?" Sasha asked as they locked their bikes to the trailhead fence. "They were from Kensington, I think. They went to Hubbard and never came home." Jade scrunched her nose, grabbing a long stick to hike with. "I thought it was just a rumor." "Are you kidding? It was all over the news last month." "I don't really watch the news. Doesn't it worry you?" "Why would it? Your mom is talking about moving there, and so are my parents. It's pretty crazy. I heard girls from Kensington disappear all the time." "Sure, Sash," Jade said, still failing to see her friend's point. "For now, they lived in Meriden. It would make more sense to be worried now." This logic evaded Sasha, however, as she was more inclined to rumors than logic. As they passed a few hikers and headed onto the pedestrian bridge, Jade couldn't help but feel annoyed by Sasha's stories of missing Kensington girls. Jade felt a bit scared about crossing the bridge, even though it was completely enclosed by metal fencing. "I'm serious, J.D. Bean. My older cousin told me that sometime in the 90s, 3 girls in her class went up there after graduation and never came back. Your cousin Aaliyah, who does tarot and is psychic. What's wrong with tarot?" "Nothing, forget it." "Hey, there's a dog at the end of the bridge. What's it doing there? Am I crazy, or is it like glowing?" At the end of the pedestrian bridge stood a small, vaguely spaniel-like, short-haired black dog. They couldn't really see its face as it was sniffing something on the ground. For some reason, as it panted, the dog looked quite blurry. Jade rubbed her eyes, thinking it was her contacts, but the blurriness remained. Something wasn't right about the dog. As they walked over the bridge in caution, it still seemed blurry and wouldn't look at them. The dog wasn't fazed by the girls' loud footsteps or the booming traffic below. Jade could almost see the glow Sasha mentioned. Small layer of fog circulating its body. "Are you seeing what I'm—" "Don't move." Jade stuck her arm out as the dog finally looked up. Its eyes were deep brown and strangely sad. The dog opened its mouth to bark. No sound came out. "I don't like this. Let's get out of here." "Jesus Christ, Sash." Despite Jade's inhibitions, Sasha continued over the bridge. Jade suddenly felt dizzy, unsure if she should be looking at the road below, or the strange dog that made no sound when it barked. "Don't touch it. It might be lost." Sasha walked several paces ahead. Reluctantly, Jade sprinted to the edge of the bridge. As they both stopped before the strange black dog, the layer of fog disappeared. It still seemed kind of blurry, though, and its eyes looked even sadder than before, even though it was still panting as Sasha stroked its back. Maybe Jade needed new contacts. "This seems weird, but does it seem kind of blurry to you?" Sasha paused and thought for a moment. "Yeah, and cold. Feel this." Sasha forced Jade's hand onto the dog's back. It seemed really cold, as if it had just stepped out of a walk-in freezer. She couldn't make sense of the blurriness either. The dog was sitting right in front of them. She remembered the Photoshop program she used in computer class and how her teacher taught her how to blur objects. None of this made sense. Images could blur, not real-life animals. Whether it was the dog's sad brown eyes, its thin black fur, or its short wagging tail, it didn't seem like a complete animal. "This makes no sense." Jade took her hand off the dog, looking up at Sasha's still excited expression. "Let's get out of here or continue up to the top. Maybe its owner is nearby. I don't know. We can't leave it." "I guess you're right." Jade and Sasha took a few steps off of the bridge and onto the trail. Even though Sasha happily petted the dog, Jade didn't want to be anywhere near it. The more she looked away, however, the dizzier she felt. When Sasha glanced up from the dog, she said something Jade couldn't hear. Her words were muffled, almost distorted. She felt increasingly lightheaded and weak, falling backward down a leaf-covered dirt hill. As Jade rolled over a few jagged "Ox," she began to panic. She felt too weak to move her body and break the fall. She braced herself as she rolled just feet away from oncoming traffic. Before she reached the pavement, 2 rugged hands grabbed her and everything faded to black. Jade opened her eyes to meet 2 arid blue ones. She recognized the thick blonde beard and plaid shirt that smelled like menthols. It was Frank. And next, To him, Sasha with a face drenched in tears. What was he doing here? Took only a few moments for Sasha to realize she was back on the pedestrian bridge, lying on Frank's nylon backpack, her entire body draped in aching sores. Are you okay, sweetheart? Yeah. What are you doing here? Oh my God, Jetty Bean! Sasha threw her arms around her and squeezed tightly. Jade groaned and Sasha profusely apologized. I'm so sorry, it's just, that was so scary. Are you sure you're okay? Yeah, Dad, Frank, what are you doing here? He laughed, which she found quite odd given the circumstances. Despite taking a shower, his long beard and scruffy hair seemed dirty. There were also more marks on his face. It's quite a coincidence, actually. I was heading to the hardware store and pulled to the side of the road because I blew a tire. I heard a loud noise coming down the hill, and there was my little troll. Frank hugged her tightly. Jade embraced him as he sounded like he was ready to sob. Honey, you have to be careful when you hike. You know this. We tried, Jade said weakly. But we saw this little black dog and I felt really dizzy and... I'm sorry, Dad. Yeah. It was really cute but weird looking, Sasha chimed in. Frank's expression grew stern as he raised his hand to stop them. Did it see you? They nodded simultaneously. Frank exhaled deeply, wiping the dirt from his face. This is going to sound crazy, girls, but you just have to, trust me. That was no normal dog. Some say a little black dog haunts these hills. What? Like a ghost? Sasha blurted out. Something like that. Frank, I thought you didn't believe in those things. I usually don't, but this one's different. Years ago, when your great-grandfather was a little kid, there were 2 geologists who fell to their deaths after seeing it. It's documented and everything. Grandpa Lou swore about it till his death, and he never spoke of anything spooky but that. He said you see it once for luck, twice for sorrow, and 3 times for death. None of this makes sense. Jade moaned. I thought you didn't believe in that stuff either. And she didn't have much luck. Have you seen a dog like that before? Jade studied Frank's expression for a moment to be sure that he was serious. They barely had any deep conversations since the divorce, but all of a sudden he was launching into this weird folktale. Oddly enough, what he said made sense. A memory deep within Jade unlocked. One from years ago when she was lost in Hubbard Park. She was no more than 4 years old. She felt scared until she saw a small black dog standing by a tree. It stayed there until her parents found her. Why? Had she forgotten? Then again, she had forgotten a lot over the years. Yeah, I think so, Jade muttered. Then, you must never go back, her father said sternly. You were lucky this time. Unlike the first time Jade saw the black dog, the second time stayed with her for years. An encounter strange and horrifying enough for her to never return to Hubbard Park. Sasha thought Frank was going crazy after the divorce, and that his belief was a product of his insanity, along with wanting to be called by his first name. Jade wasn't sure at all. She never developed a belief in the supernatural other than in this instance. Sasha became even more skeptical over the years after dating a guy named Jordan, who believed in everything paranormal. At one point, Jade dated Jordan's friend Miguel. He was equally a believer, but somehow more rational. Whenever the 3 of them mentioned the black dog incident and their varying beliefs, Jade shut them down. After her 27th birthday, it became easier to shut everyone out. She broke up with Miguel and moved into a dilapidated house in Winstead with Colt, her slightly effeminate college roommate. He hated talking about anything even remotely scary and never brought up Jade's past, so their living arrangement worked perfectly. Still, she couldn't shake some things from her childhood. She still felt uncomfortable seeing someone walk a run-of-the-mill black dog around town. She still felt uncomfortable calling her dad Frank, even though he became less of a dad over the years. When Colt told Jade she should try therapy one night, she agreed to his surprise. So that's a yes? You're agreeing with me for once, Colt said as they stared into the glow of an autumn bonfire. I thought you said therapy was stupid. I never said that. Jade slightly nudged him. Besides, maybe I was stupid for doubting you. Really? Yeah. It hasn't always been easy. Colt smiled, and they leaned into the fire, admiring the glowing embers and brisk September night. It almost made Jade forget her ex-boyfriend and financial troubles. Something deeper troubled her, though. It had been 15 years since her encounter with the black dog, and her even creepier encounter with her dad on the side of the road. In those years, he never warned her about the black dog again. She figured it was just a story to keep her out of trouble. She thought about that incident around this time of year, and it would usually fade with the autumn leaves. This year it didn't, though. Just as soon as she was about to forget again, she learned that the story Sasha told around the same time of the missing Kensington girls was more than just a story. "What are you reading about on your phone so intently?" "Sorry." Jade looked up at Colt, who was roasting a marshmallow on a stick. "I am reading about those girls from Kensington who disappeared in the 90s. I thought that was just a rumor. Apparently not. Here's the weird thing. I'm reading this breaking news article, and apparently there are 2 girls from Kensington who have disappeared around that park again, Chloe Peters and Alexa. Oh no." "What?" Jade read the name a few times over to make sure she had the name right. "It can't be. He didn't, for Christ's sake, Jade," he said, getting up to peer over her shoulder. "Is that Miguel's?" "Alexa Boyd, yes. As in Alexa Boyd, Miguel's cousin." Jade stood up frantically and checked the name for the 3rd time. "Yeah, that's his cousin. I didn't get the—" "Oh, never mind. The alert came earlier this morning. How could I not notice?" "I didn't get— Oh, shit." Colt checked his phone as well and scrolled through the messages. "I didn't see it either, but the alert came earlier today. Chloe Peters and Alexa Boyd, 2 12-year-old girls from Kensington, Connecticut, disappeared around Hubbard Park on Thursday morning. That was a little over 24 hours ago." "Fuck." Jade ran her hands through her hair and started shaking. "How could he not tell me?" "You've been broken up for a month. Why would he?" "You don't understand, Colt. I knew his family. I loved them." "Have you talked to him in a month?" "No, not really." "What do we do?" Colt sat back down on this lawn chair, and Jade frantically scrolled through the article for a 4th time just to make sure. "What can we do?" "I'm going to text him." "Don't, please." "I have to. I knew Alexa. I loved her. She was like his little sister. Well, like not literally, but still." "Colt, what should we do?" Colt stared deeper into the fire as Jade paced back and forth, contemplating whether or not she should text Miguel. When she finally couldn't stand it anymore, Jade stopped looking at Colt and started texting Miguel. She wasn't sure which line of text she wanted to choose and kept erasing her responses. Finally, Colt snatched Jade's phone from her, choosing, "I heard about Alexa. Can I do anything to help?" "Oh my God. Why, Colt? You were taking forever. Now we wait." Colt held onto her phone. As Jade extended a hand, Colt shook his head. "Don't even. Someone with a clear head needs to do this. I didn't even want you talking to him to begin with." "Okay, Princess," Jade said, sitting back on her lawn chair. "Have it your way." Miguel didn't respond, and the longer he didn't respond, the more nervous Jade became. Even when they were in the worst of fights, he would tell Jade everything. After they broke up, it was just radio silence. At that moment, she couldn't even remember why they broke up, just the pain that lingered in his absence. Even worse, she imagined Miguel staying up late, crying in his New Haven apartment over Alexa's disappearance. Miguel was teaching her karate at a nearby studio in Meriden, a part-time gig he picked up to pay the bills. He was also helping her through her parents' divorce. Jade was just beginning to know Alexa really well when their relationship ended. Abruptly, "I want to go there, Colt," she said, almost in tears as they were putting out the fire. "I just want to get in my car and drive there. He shouldn't be alone through this." "Jade, I know you still— How do I put this? It's 10 at night, and you haven't spoken to each other in a month. I don't care how late it is. He shouldn't be alone through this. I don't care what happened to us right now. Alexa means everything to him, and God knows he still—" She couldn't finish that sentence without a teardrop trickling down her cheek. She stopped herself and stormed inside their house, headed into the living room, and turned on the small boxy television they had kept since their college years. The reception was super glitchy. After nervously slamming the remote into her palm, she flipped through several channels before stumbling upon the 10 o'clock news. She waited anxiously as a female reporter brought up their featured story. "A tragedy in Meriden, Connecticut," Ann Naveen proclaimed, locking eyes with the camera. Her well-dressed co-anchor, Dan Patricks, looked on stoically as footage of police and a search and rescue team patrolling Hubbard Park rolled across the screen. 12-year-old Kensington girls Chloe Peters and Alexa Boyd disappeared on their way to Hubbard Park Thursday morning. An Amber Alert has been issued, and police and locals have engaged in a non-stop search for the two girls. Jade and Colt looked on helplessly as an anchor interviewed an older couple in the park. The text on the bottom of the screen made her stomach churn. The search for missing Kensington girls underway. While the couple admitted that they hadn't seen the two girls, they confessed to spotting a strange man in the woods on their way up to Castle Craig. "My husband and I were walking up around. What was it, honey, 6? The older man nodded. "We didn't see the girls, but we did see something strange. There was this tall man in the woods. I don't know what he was doing there. He was, let's see, maybe 6 feet tall, had a long, blonde beard, wore some kind of baseball hat with a bird on it and smelled like menthols like my Morty used to smoke. He waved at us and walked away. It was so strange. I don't know what he was doing there." An aggressive headache overwhelmed Jade's senses as the reporter continued on about police cautioning the public that there were no suspects yet, but to keep a watchful eye. The woman's description of the blonde beard and stench of menthols took Jade instantly back to her childhood. Even Colt, who only met Frank once during college, gave Jade a look. The woman gave a universal description. "She saw my dad. I mean Frank, I was about to say. What the hell was he doing in the woods? Maybe he was looking for something. The timing just seems weird. Frank's a weird guy." With those words, the conversation faded to silence as the news story changed to one about a local sports team changing its name. Anxiously gripping her phone in her palm, Jade imagined Frank in the woods smiling a yellow, decomposing smile. That awful smile crept underneath her skin and kept her awake some nights, especially when she remembered the weird ways he came home. After a long day at work, he often said he was going to the hills, especially if he was frustrated. Sometimes, he came home many hours later, covered in dirt or bruised, claiming he took a bad fall. She accepted this excuse once or twice until she realized the trail wasn't that long or dangerous. Before Jade drifted off to sleep, she remembered years ago when she looked up the black dog legend in her middle school's computer lab. She read about 2 geologists who fell to their deaths after seeing the black dog a 3rd time. She couldn't remember their names, but was stunned by the legitimacy of the source. Still, she didn't remember herself experiencing any sorrow or any luck many years before when she saw it for the first time. Just as she slipped into a deep, uncomfortable slumber, she recalled Sasha telling her that the dog attempted a voiceless growl at her dad as they walked back up the hill before scampering off, leaving no footprints behind. Come to think of it, dogs typically growled at her dad when she saw them. When Jade awoke the next morning, she had a thought dancing on the tip of her tongue, and Colt knew exactly what it was. As she entered the kitchen, Jade blurted out, "I think my dad might be a serial killer." Colt looked up from his cereal and sighed. "You're so predictable." "What do you mean? You don't remember the last several times you called him a serial killer? He fits the profile. He's a loner. He goes on long walks and long trips alone, and when young girls disappear, it's always around where he lives." "I knew you would say that. One description about your weird dad on TV and all of a sudden, it's too coincidental. His being in the woods is probably, I don't know, to take a smoke?" "On the day the girls disappeared." "So what? He lives right near the hills. And what about his weird black dog story on the day he just so happened to see me? On the side of the road? Seems like misdirection." "Oh God, not the damn black dog. Do you actually believe in that?" "No, I don't know. I mean, of course not. It just seems like a weird thing to say at a weird time." and the dog was blurry and made no noise when it barked. What does that have to do with anything? Also, everything's blurry when you remember your childhood. I love you, but it's almost like you want him to be a serial killer. This gave Jade pause. Until Colt pointed it out, she hadn't considered how often she mentioned her dad's serial killer vibes or her uneasy encounter with the black dog when she was young. Her friends, especially Colt, were probably sick of it. 15 years had passed without her discovering any proof for her accusations or any more idea about what significance, if any, her encounter with the black dog held. I can't believe I'm saying this, but would you like to go to Hubbard Park today? She nodded enthusiastically. I'm not sure what we could do. Maybe it will give you peace of mind. Maybe we can help. I'm not sure how, but okay. After finishing their breakfast, they put on their barely used hiking shoes, and Colt drove them to Hubbard Park. On the way there, Jade kept refreshing her messages, hoping for any sign of Miguel. She even deleted several messages in hopes that they would be delayed, but hope, like anything else, was futile. Instead, she stumbled across an article in which a woman named Haley insisted that the disappearance of Alexa and Chloe was connected to the disappearance of her friends Krista and Eve in the late 90s. The woman discussed spending years searching for her friends with a suspect in mind, but no conclusive evidence. Jade wasn't sure if she had omitted the suspect's name, or if the news site chose not to publish it at all. Check this out. Mere seconds after Colt pulled into the dirt lot by the trailhead, Jade shoved the phone into his hands. Don't just nod. Read. Haley Brunel believes the disappearances of her friends in 1999 are connected to the tragic disappearance of... Yeah, so they might be. What's your point? Read a little bit further. Brunel believes that her friends are no longer alive. Well, that's dark. Yes, I'll read on. And fears they might be buried somewhere in hanging hills. Authorities state there is no reason to believe this at this time and will continue their search for Alexa and Chloe. I believe her. You don't know her. Does that matter? I know you're overwhelmed with all this. Let's just take things one step at a time. As the twosome walked onto the dirt trail, they remarked how quiet and empty the trail was for a Saturday morning, with the exception of a guy speeding by them on a mountain bike. No matter how hard Colt attempted to make idle conversation, she couldn't shake the thought of the girls from different decades meeting the same fate. She couldn't shake the thought that Frank was somehow involved. Jade felt her mind and body slip into autopilot as Colt droned on about his own relationship troubles and how steep the hill was. Colt didn't have the body type or demeanor for hiking, so they took a short break halfway up the hill. He sat upon a rock, griping about how they should have packed a water bottle. She paid no mind to his banter as she saw a figure standing at the top of the trail that stopped abruptly at a winding road. She could recognize the wavy, shoulder-length brown hair, slightly muscular build, and well-worn Nirvana smiley t-shirt from anywhere. He was staring at something across the road. Miguel. Jade felt the trembling intonation of her voice as she met his surprised but despondent expression. Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. He shook his head and gave her a faint smile. Hey guys, I'm sorry I didn't return your text. I've been out here for hours. I'm so... Miguel raised a finger to his lips. No offense, guys. I don't want to hear that right now. I've heard too much of that over the past 2 days. Jade struggled to find the right words. Look, we're here to help. Colt's eyes widened, but after processing those words, he nodded in agreement. Thanks, guys. I'm not sure what we can do. I'm not sure how to start. The police searched the area with their dogs over the past 2 days and didn't find anything. They've moved on to other areas. Jade wanted desperately to put an arm around his shoulders, but stopped a few inches short of the small of his. But you're not convinced. Miguel shook his head and sighed, running his fingers down the dark circles under his eyes. They were going to Castle Craig. It was their hangout place. I know this sounds crazy, but I don't think they'd be anywhere else. It doesn't sound crazy, Colt said. Your cousin's a badass hiker like you, and I'm sure her friend is too. Miguel smiled. Thanks for treating her like she still exists. My whole family, They act like she's gone. It's been less than 2 days and they're simultaneously talking about preparing for the worst and praying to God for her return. I don't want to do any of those things. It doesn't help, guys. Clenching his fists and holding back tears, Miguel motioned for them to step onto the road. I've been all over these godforsaken woods. The only place I haven't been yet today is Castle Craig. People are idiots, so we have to be careful. Walking up, Colt and Jade nodded as they crossed onto the left side of the road. Have you found anything at all? Jade noticed her own nervous inflections, but it didn't matter. It felt good to just be near him again. She noticed he was skinnier, and not in a healthy sort of way. But skinny like the month his adopted father took ill when they were in college. She noticed bruises coursing the length of his arms, not the kind he usually incurred from a karate match, but the kind of bruise one would receive from a great fall. Just some footprints off the trail, but I don't have the type of expertise to tell what those are. Times like these make me wish my Uncle Tony was still alive, Colt remarked. They could see the tower from their vantage point, and surprisingly few cars in the parking lot surrounding it. He was a detective. Miguel reclenched his fists. Maybe yours would take this investigation more seriously. Hey, Jade, you okay? The three of them turned around to see a small, vaguely spaniel-like, short-haired black dog. Jade felt all the hairs on her neck pierce her skin as the dog sat by the curbside, happily panting, but without a sound, as Miguel and Colt eagerly pet it. Just like years ago, the dog looked simultaneously blurry and vibrantly clear, especially its brown and strangely sad eyes. Her father's haunting words, 3 times for death, echoed through her mind along with the guy's oblivious laughter. I needed this today, Miguel said, smiling. Lone truck passed them as they scratched the back of his ears. Poor guy is cold. I hope his owner is nearby. Jade, are you good? Colt took one look at her frozen green eyes and grunted. Oh, God, you think that's the black dog, don't you? Miguel looked at her as well. Oh, no. I remember now. Jade, that's not 3 times for death. Going to die soon, Jade murmured, unable to move any part of her body. That's a ghost dog, all right, Colt said, laughing and nudging Jade. Ease up on her. Miguel placed an arm around her back. It's just a dog, Jade. It's really friendly, too. It looks young, too. It can't be the one you saw years ago. 3 times for death, Jade murmured again. When the guys attempted to move her a few inches forward, she wouldn't budge, but Miguel's phone came loose from his pocket. The dog opened its mouth to bark. No sound came out, which, infuriatingly to Jade, didn't faze them one bit. But when the dog grabbed his phone like it was a chew toy and began to run, Miguel shouted, "Damn pooch!" and began to chase it back toward the road. Colt followed, straggling along. Guys, don't. Jade finally managed to shout as they sped back down the road and toward the trail. As the dog ran, it looked increasingly blurry, and not just because of its speed. It also had a slight misty aura around its body. Watch out! The dog dashed. Down the hill they walked up and then several paces off the hill. For a moment the dog looked like it was floating across the decaying leaves. They didn't pay attention to where they were running as they struggled to keep the dog in sight. All at once they tripped over a jagged rock and tumbled down a hill, far off the trail, which was thankfully mostly leaves and dirt. Jade reached out to find anything that would break her fall as she saw Colt somersault past her. They were free-falling with the dog still in sight. Jade wondered if this was really the 3rd time Frank and her grandfather warned of it. Perhaps she would face the same fate as those geologists, falling to a dark and terrifying demise. Just before she thought of praying to some deity she wasn't sure she believed in, they stopped rolling. Miguel was the first one to stand up, shouting obscenities, before bending over to help up Jade first and Colt, who almost pulled him over. They checked each other for blood and broken bones. When they were satisfied that they were bruised but stable, they spotted the black dog in front of a shovel staked upright into a mound of dirt. Miguel's phone lay on top of the mound. When he reached for it, they saw the dog growling at the shovel, but like its panting or bark without a sound. Oh my God. That's a gravedigger's shovel, a really old one too. Colt said. My grandpa brought one of these home from a crime scene once. That's so eerie. Miguel reached to grab the shovel at its handle, but Jade gripped his wrist. What is it? I think we're standing on a burial plot. They jumped back a few paces. The mound of dirt was outlined in a near-perfect rectangle of about 5 feet in length and maybe a couple in width. That's a human body under there, Jade stammered. She was certain enough to make that claim, remembering her late uncle's burial years back. We've got to find our way out of here and tell the police. Yeah, Colt said, visibly shaken by the scene. Jade was breathing heavily when the dog rubbed his head against her leg. Hesitantly, she looked into its sad brown eyes and touched its frigid back. She was certain this was the same dog she had seen years ago. Why it wasn't invisible like a ghost, she wasn't sure, but it didn't seem menacing one bit. Despite how young and short the dog looked, its touch indicated it was an old soul, one that lived perhaps countless lifetimes. I'm sorry, Jade whispered to the dog. You were trying to help. Miguel, drop the shovel. Colt suddenly shouted. Miguel was digging tenaciously into the dirt, tears streaming down his cheeks. Miguel, stop! Jade screamed. They grabbed onto each arm, but Miguel pulled himself away, practically diving with the shovel. Come on, Miguel, let go! It could be them. It could be them. The three toppled onto the plot and covered their ears. A sudden crack or bang pierced the air. Miguel looked fearfully over his shoulder as the bang repeated a few times. By the time Jade and Colt also realized what it was, Miguel was screaming, "Run!" The sound of gunfire was unmistakable. They weren't sure where it was coming from, just that they had to run, no matter how blindly, away from the sound, which grew closer and closer. They were running back up the hill when they fell down, or so Jade thought. She wasn't sure if she could still hear gunfire, or if it was all in her head, but she was too terrified to look back. For a moment, Jade thought the dog was running beside them, but when she turned to her left, she saw Colt starting to lag behind. She yelled for Miguel to slow down, grasping onto Colt, who was practically hyperventilating as they finally crossed back onto the main trail. They no longer heard the sound of gunfire. They fell to their knees, coughing and wheezing, struggling to gain awareness of their surroundings. Colt doubled over and vomited onto a pile of leaves. Jade grabbed onto his back and he emptied what little contents he had left from a light breakfast. I'm sorry, Colt uttered weakly. No, honey, Jade said. It's not behind us anymore. Miguel, if you have service, call the police. Miguel nodded and pulled out his phone, which only had a couple of bars. As the dispatcher picked up, he anxiously glanced over his shoulder for any unwelcome sound or figure. Hello? Hello? Yes. Yes. My name is Miguel Boyd. My friends and I were hiking the Hanging Hills Trail from Hubbard Park, and yes, in Meriden, we found a grave site and heard nearby gunfire, and god damn it. No. Before he could relay any more information, his phone drained to black. You gave them enough info, Jade said, noticing her own phone was dead as well. Colt, do you have... Never mind. You left it in the house, god damn it. Do you think we're safe, Miguel? Colt stood up slowly, wiping some vomit from his lip. I don't want to find out. Miguel fixed his shirt and then looked up at Jade's watery green eyes. Let's get the hell out of here, not run. Just walk with intention. Hopefully, by the time we reach the trailhead, the cops will be here. The three of them walked, side by side in silence over the footbridge and back to the parking lot. There were still no hikers on the trail. Jade didn't know what to say. She was both terrified and relieved. The dog she feared for all those years was nothing to fear at all. She wasn't sure if it was a spirit or some type of immortal entity. But it wasn't the evil creature Frank or the countless individuals that encountered the dog that made it out to be. If anything, it wasn't angry at the people who saw it for a second or third time, but trying to seek help. Something far more evil lurked within those hills. The black dog was warning of that evil. At that moment, Frank's fear all those years The ghost seemed infinitely less likely to relate to a curse or legend. When they reached the trailhead, a single police cruiser sat idling in the parking lot. The three of them rushed over to the lone officer, who was caught off guard as they gathered around him. After motioning for them to calm down and that he could only hear one person at a time, he took their statement. They told the officer every excruciating detail, which he recorded on his mobile laptop. Jade even told the officer about the black dog, which caused him to look up and wince before continuing to type. By the end of their frantically told, albeit thorough story, the officer called for backup on his radio. Then he sectioned off the trailhead with red tape with black lettering that read, "Do not enter." The mere words caused Jade's heart to jump. "We're going to close the trail to the public today," the officer said. "We received a few more phone calls about the gunshots, so we're going to follow up on this. We'll call you if we have any additional questions. You'll be hearing from us within the next few hours. Here's my card." Why wouldn't he ask us to show him the burial site? Miguel said gruffly as he opened the door to his beat-up Camry. "Keep your voice down," Colt snapped, unlocking his car. "He said he'll follow up with us." "Do you want to go back to our place?" Jade said softly. "Thanks, but I have to make some calls to my mom and aunt. I'll catch up with you guys." On impulse, Jade reached over to hug him. This caught Miguel off guard, but he ultimately fell into her embrace and pulled her in closely. At that moment, all the anger and pain that lingered from the breakup subsided. She was just glad that he was there and safe. She didn't have to ask to know he felt the same. "I'm here for you, through all of this. I know, I don't know what to—" Instead of finishing that sentence, Miguel kissed her on the cheek. She smiled and watched with an ungodly amount of uncertainty, fear, and bliss as he sped out of the park. Colt sighed and hugged Jade as well, apologizing for the vomit that splattered onto her shirt, which caused her to snort a laugh. They drove in silence all the way back to Winstead. In the silence, Jade, of course, thought of everything they had been through, but kept coming back to the shovel. She was almost sure she had seen that type of shovel before. As a teenager, Frank tasked her with mowing the lawn every other visit. If she remembered correctly, that shovel lay in the shed with the lawnmower. The memory was so clear because she remembered how unusual it was for Frank to own it. It would be another day and a half before the officer returned their call with the unfortunate news that they had neither located the burial plot nor the man with the gun. This caused Miguel to angrily return to the hills without Jade or Colt's knowledge. After searching late into Sunday night, he never found the plot either. It would be only another week before the news coverage died down over Alexa and Chloe's disappearance. Miguel took up extra hours at the karate studio and Colt at the Bushnell to get their minds off of their anxieties. Jade grew sick of seeing the same regulars at the brewery, especially being hit on by them. So she called out the following Saturday. That day, Jade drove aimlessly throughout Meriden, not sure what she was looking for that the police didn't already find. Other than a few missing person signs around town, she didn't uncover much. She knew she wanted to stop by Frank's house. When she reached the street, she thought about pulling into the driveway until she saw his car wasn't there. The lawn and bushes looked overgrown as if he didn't live there anymore. Jade couldn't remember the last time she visited his house, just that he never neglected yard work. Just when she was about to turn the car around, she noticed a woman sitting in a parked SUV across the street. Without much forethought, Jade pulled up behind the SUV and parked, cautiously approaching the driver's side window. On any other day, she wouldn't have been as brave, but the stern look on the face of the woman with jet black hair spiked her curiosity. The woman rolled down the windows. Jade rocked back and forth on her heels and gulped. "Yes, can I help you?" Her voice was both stern and dismissive. "I already told the other neighbor that I'm not fucking leaving until the cops come." "No," Jade said hoarsely. "I have a feeling we're here for the same reason." "Yeah? What would that be, honey?" The woman was probably in her late 30s, but her vast crow's feet made her appear much older. On her lap lay a pair of sunglasses and a stack of photographs. "Are you one of Frank's whores or something?" "Well, I got news for you, honey. I'm his daughter." This gave the woman pause. No shit. All these years and I never saw his family around. Some father he must be. What's your name? Jade. Jade. Do you know who the hell your father is? Do you know what the hell your father is? Reluctantly, she nodded. I think I know, but I don't want to. Shit, hun, she said, stepping out of the vehicle. The woman was maybe 5.5 feet, but carried herself like she was much taller and unafraid of anything. You have to. I'm sorry to break the news to you, honey, but 17 years ago, your father killed my friends. Oh God, you're Haley Brunel. Jade felt her whole body go numb. She never thought she'd have her suspicions confirmed all those years later. All those times she half-jokingly told her friends about her dad's serial killer vibes were no joke at all. She didn't have to ask for proof to know Haley had it. She felt a weird mixture of total nauseousness and relief. You've done your homework. Good for you. I've been following him for so many years. Is that what you're doing here? She nodded, glaring at the house. He hasn't been here for at least a week, maybe longer. I'm sure he's taken off ever since that news report broke. But, I'm sorry, I need to sit down. She felt the world spinning rapidly around her, and her entire body growing numb. Haley knelt down by Jade as she cradled her head in her hands. I'm sorry, Haley. I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry about, she said. It sounds like you've known about him. I thought I did. Jade looked up, her face drenched in an ugly mess of tears and sweat. When I was a teenager, he started acting really weird. He divorced my mom and cleared out his house. He also took really long trips and asked me to start calling him Frank. Haley paused. You didn't know this, but Frank had been stalking us for months before they died. We used to go to Hanging Hills all the time. He found us on the trail one day and told us that tired black dog legend. I'm not sure what the hell he was doing there, but he saw us on the next several trips. He told us how pretty we were, and I'm not sure if you want to know more. I do, that's disgusting. He told me the same thing. I feel sick. Did you call the police? Feel everything you need to, it's a lot. Yes, we did, and they didn't take us seriously. After they disappeared, I remember angrily pounding on his door. I screamed at him and told him he didn't deserve to be alive and didn't deserve to be a dad. Oh my God. He filed a restraining order against me and my family. I haven't found anything since. Any more evidence, but I know. Are you an investigator? Haley chuckled, glancing over her shoulder for cars. Just a very pissed-off single mother. I forgot to ask, what are you doing here? You'd probably think I'm crazy. Try me. My friends and I went looking for those girls. We saw the black dog. Jade was surprised she wasn't judging. It's hard to explain what it is. It's not like a ghost, but kind of blurry when you see it and cold to the touch. Anyway, the dog led us to this burial plot with a long shovel staked in it. A grave digger's shovel, she remarked coldly. Yeah, we also heard gunshots and ran. It was pretty terrifying. We told the cops, but they didn't find anything. Jade's words seemed to cut through Haley's stern exterior. She sighed, running her fingers through her hair. The last time Krista, Eve and I went there together, we saw the dog too. It led us to the same kind of plot. When we told the cops about what we found about Frank following us, they didn't go out there. It makes sense, Jade said sadly. My dad had a few good friends on the force back in the day. You never answered my question. They both stood up and took another long look at the house. Haley adjusted her jean jacket, furrowing her brow. Jade glanced at her, her lower lip slightly trembling. What are you doing here? When I was a kid, I saw that shovel in his shed. I wanted to see if it was still there. We can go look. We just have to watch out for the neighbors. They crept across the street and into the tall grass. Jade peered through the window while Haley scaled the side of the house. The interior was completely vacant, save for a lone, unplugged lamp on the hardwood floor. Jade scrambled to the side and noticed the garage was vacant too, and the windows were collecting cobwebs. As they entered the backyard, she could see from the single-hung windows that the kitchen was completely stripped of its appliances. Take a look at this. Haley had busted the lock to the gray saltbox shed. Jade hurried over. They stared, jaw agape, at the red writing hastily scribbled all over the walls and floors. There were several names and dates repeated in different lengths. Oh my God, they saw the names immediately. Eve Cross and Krista Nolan, 1999. Haley gasped and clasped a hand over her mouth, her tough exterior slipping into one of absolute shock and terror. There were several other names they didn't recognize. Allie Sheelan, 1992. Naomi DeLeon, 1994. Ricky Johnson, 2006. Jade wrapped an arm around Haley's waist as they saw the next two names, Chloe Peters and Alexa Boyd. The date followed. She wondered if she should take the sign as a positive one, an indication that their fates hadn't been sealed yet. There was another name in the far corner, one with an L that she couldn't quite make out. "I'm going to check inside the house," Haley said, her face flushed and pale. "Just to be sure the girls aren't there. You should call the police and let them know what we found. All these years." "Yeah," Jade said. "Be careful." It was all too much. Her mind couldn't tell her body to reach for her phone. The names paralyzed her with fear. The closer she looked, the more she found in the far corners of the shed. Victoria Malcolm, 1991. Billy Smith, 1989. Nikki Lamerick, 2002. Mayela Cruz, 2009. Who were these girls? When did her dad have time to find them? She had been in the shed a million times over the years, even as an adult. Why were the names here now? In the furthest corner of the shed, which was devoid of any light, she saw the final name. Little Troll. No dates followed. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see either. All of her senses were fading. When she opened her mouth to scream, she couldn't do that either. She could only hear the distinct sounds of the shed door latching behind her. The darkness was utterly disorienting. She felt herself slip into a deep, panicked, and nightmarish slumber. The slumber felt like an eternity of being unable to breathe or think coherently. Through the darkness, she could see faint images of the girls she never met. Billy Smith wore a blue and green sequin top when Frank stopped her on the footbridge, claiming he had lost his daughter. She was skipping school, which she was failing anyway, and eager to help. Victoria Malcolm wore a pink flannel shirt when her father claimed to be a friend of Victoria's dad atop the stone tower. She thought she knew all of her dad's friends, but he seemed nice enough and claimed to play basketball with him in high school. Eve Cross and Krista Nolan were wearing the new silver chair shirts they purchased at the concert the night before, when Frank told them at the trailhead that he was a roadie for the band. Nikki Lambert wore a gray American Eagle sweatshirt when Frank told her that her mom was looking for her. Nikki and her mom were the best of friends, like the mother-daughter duo on that WB network series that Jade used to watch. It wasn't clear what Mayela was wearing when her face was covered in dirt, but she felt her fear and sadness being betrayed by her own soccer coach. It wasn't long until Jade realized she was covered in dirt too. When Jade regained her sense of taste, she realized how appalling the taste of soil truly was with its chalky, earthy texture. She attempted to spit it out, but more dirt trickled down, so she sealed her lips entirely. When Jade regained her sense of smell, she noticed the soil's horribly sour and metallic scent, which she had a difficult time breathing through with only centimeters of her nostrils uncovered. When Jade regained her sense of sound, she noticed the crackles, clicks, and pops from above. She also heard the sound of her phone buzzing somewhere. When Jade regained her sense of touch and consciousness, she was absolutely horrified by the immense pressure pushing down on her body. For several minutes, she tried to thrash her body, but only moved an inch at best. She was losing oxygen again, and rapidly. From above, she heard more distinct crackles, clicks, and pops, followed by the sound of grating and rasping. Something or someone was digging her up. It wasn't the spade of a shovel. Its movements were still rapid, but yet more gradual. She watched the dirt flick upward in small chunks. When her nose and mouth were unearthed, she realized two small, black paws were doing the digging. When the paws had removed enough dirt from her body, she used all of her strength to force her body upward, using what minimal arm strength she had left to crawl out from the grave. The black dog bit onto her sleeve and helped tug her the rest of the way. As Jade rose to her feet, struggling to catch her breath, the dog guarded her in front, raising its tail with its ears flat against its head. The dog stood much taller than its familiar spaniel-like stature. If not for its familiar features, she would have mistaken it for a Great Dane. The dog was no longer blurry but glowing in a misty, green-tinted aura. Its sad brown eyes were no longer sad or brown, but blue and fiery, like the combustion of carbon. Jade stared in horror at the unmarked dirt plots that surrounded her from all sides. They numbered in the dozens, maybe double or triple that. She couldn't be sure. Then she looked back, even more horrified, at the grave she came from, which was at least 4 feet deep. How long had the dog been digging for? How long had she been buried? All time seemed to elude her. She knew she heard her phone but couldn't find it. She knew not to run, though with the dog guarding her, moving in every direction she turned. "Thanks, buddy," she whispered. "Should we?" Just as she was about to move, the smell of menthols overwhelmed her senses the same way. It had for many years. From between 2 bushes, her father, a frailer-looking man than she remembered in torn flannel, appeared carrying the gravedigger's shovel in his hand. "You were never supposed to find out," Frank said coldly, looking at the dog and not. Her Jade said nothing. "You were never supposed to find him either." Silence. She stared blankly into his arid blue eyes as if she were daring him to strike. She was no longer afraid of the man she stopped calling Dad long ago. "Is this the 3rd time you've seen him, Frank?" With these words, Frank's arid eyes widened, his pupils dilated. He attempted to lunge forward, drawing a small, gray pistol from a concealed holster, but the black dog leaped and tackled him into the grave. Frank unleashed a blood-curdling scream. The scream lasted mere moments before gnawing and gurgling sounds took its place. The gnawing and gurgling sounds turned to ones of crumbling, as a mound of dirt collapsed into the grave. After the dirt collapsed, she heard the collective screams of Frank's countless victims escape into the atmosphere. These weren't screams of terror, but cries of freedom. Cries for the monster to stay buried forever, every inch of his evil being rotting into the earth. The dog jumped from the grave into a nearby pile of leaves, its stature morphing back to spaniel form. It took one last look at Jade, its eyes now a bold shade of brown, and drifted into the vast woods. Jade started to run, faster than she had ever run before. Somewhere in the distance, she heard people screaming her name. The closer she ran, the more distinctly she could make out the voices of Colt, Miguel, Haley, and possibly Sasha, though she couldn't be sure. Then, another female voice called her name that she didn't recognize at all. Jade lost all sense of where she came from, but at least knew the direction she needed to run toward. Somehow, she also knew that the black dog wouldn't let a single soul be buried in Hanging Hills again. In regards to the Yakutia incident, much doubt has been placed on my official statements and testimony. The cynical among you have cited the slightest of contradictions in my accounts, and even noted supposed tics in my body language as evidence of deceit. And so it follows that accusations have been made of criminal activity and cover-up. I have done my best to ignore these accusations since they are baseless and thus could not ever manifest into official charges. Yet it has become clear to me in recent days that these conspiracy theories have generated undue curiosity in the incident. Curiosity that could prove quite dangerous. As this was my chief concern when fabricating my statements, let me address the Yakutia incident with utmost transparency. The truth, I hope, will deter further inquisition. Before I recount the sequence of events as I truly experienced them, let me preface with a short statement. This is the truth, though it is your choice to believe it. By all means, I would encourage you to consider the incident an unfortunate accident, as I have previously said, and to forget it entirely. You should have a hard time proving otherwise. But to those of you that hear the sincerity in my words, do not chase the truth any further than I have. I fear we will all regret such a reckless decision. On August 24, 2036, a representative of the alternative energy giant Greenways International contacted me in regards to my prolific research in thermodynamic degradation of the world's permafrost layers. Although not a climatologist like myself, the representative was quite familiar with my work. For some time, we discussed our concerns about the warming of the planet and how thawing of permafrost layers could lead to the breakdown of organic material and the release of greenhouse gases, which could further accelerate climate change. In ISD particular, the representative mentioned Yodoma, areas of organic-rich Pleistocene-age permafrost, which I have expressed in my recent research as nothing short of a ticking time bomb. Greenways apparently was interested specifically in the Yodoma of northern Yakutia, where thawing is occurring at troubling rates. The company offered me a hefty sum of money to research the subject deeper. Not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, I accepted the offer, asking only which other researchers would join me. The representative did not say. Instead, he babbled on about travel plans, necessary equipment, and other logistical concerns. From the moment I accepted, everything moved at a startling pace, but I assumed the company was as excited as I was. Within a month, I found myself trekking through the Russian Far East in the back of an old Jeep. Inside the Jeep with me was Ulrich Klein, Madeline Walsh, and Igor Shimkov. All four of us were climatologists. I had met Ulrich before at a conference. The others I had only heard of through my readings. Regardless, there was a certain camaraderie among us, due to which we found the journey quite enjoyable. Conversation flowed, as did the wine Madeline brought to help pass the time. This camaraderie developed first of all from our shared subject of study, but not least of all because from the onset, we were cordoned off from the rest of the expedition team. The navigators, both locals, rode ahead. This did not seem illogical, since someone needed to guide us to the proper location. Behind them rode another Jeep with the team leader, Eric Nosworthy. Eric was an executive from Greenways. He was a calm and agreeable man, but he communicated with us almost exclusively through a two-way radio. In the car with him were two others. I was never formally introduced to them. Whenever we stopped for a break or to clear debris from the road, Eric was careful to keep us from the mysterious members of our team. He would task us with reviewing equipment, charting areas for measurement, and drawing up timetables. Busy work and distractions, that's all it was. Igor was the first to question Eric's intentions, going so far as to ask the man himself, but Eric dismissed him swiftly. Once we reached the site of our study, he said, he would introduce everyone formally. It was a lie, but by then it wouldn't matter. As for the rest of us, our suspicions appeared not long after Igor's. Despite Eric tasking us with finding promising areas for research, all of our suggestions were ignored. It became clear that the expedition already had a destination in mind. We were just along for the ride. After an arduous journey through the unblemished tundra, we stopped. Eric announced over the radio that we had reached our port of call. Still, clinging to the hope of actual academic pursuit, we exited our vehicle in a buzz. We collected our equipment from the trunk and set out with every intention of completing the research we were hired to do. Ulrich and Madeline began collecting samples of the earth to analyze its concentration of organic matter. Igor took temperature measurements and probed the ground to see how deep the thaw had penetrated the permafrost. I, however, was determined to meet the others. After all, it would be rude not to say hello. When I arrived to introduce myself, Eric and his two associates were deep in a serious discussion. So engaged were they in this discussion that they did not even notice me. Brows knit, voices hushed. They pored over a black leather-bound book. "It must be close," a muscular, bald man said. A stocky man with glasses nodded in agreement. "He told me it would not be so." The man froze mid-sentence as I announced myself with a curt clear of the throat. As soon as he saw me, he slammed the book shut. I introduced myself and asked for their names. The man in glasses was Eli, and the other was Joseph. No family names were given, and I did not press them further. I did, however, inquire about their specialties. You can imagine my surprise when Joseph said archaeology. as taken aback as I was. Eric was even more so. At once he ushered Eli and Joseph away. I heard him direct the pair north to search further. For what? At the time, I could not even manage a guess. Eric returned shortly after to explain what I had heard. To his credit, he told the truth, or at least parts of it anyway. Joseph and Eli were tasked with a secondary mission. One he promised was no greater or lesser than our own. They received word of a historically significant artifact in the area, and, given its proximity to the Yadoma in Yakutia, decided to link our two projects for efficiency's sake. This did not seem entirely insensible, and I was glad to hear the truth for once, so I did not think to ask why this information was initially kept from us, or what this artifact was. In any case, I returned to the team of climatologists to inform them of what I had learned. Igor was glad to hear his intuition was correct. Madeline was satisfied so long as their work continued, and Ulrich could not care less. Overall, the revelation was not one that sparked much discussion. We still believed we had a task to complete. Even if our mission was the lesser of the two, climatology has always been treated with such dismissive attitudes. To the uninformed, our work appears dull and inconsequential. Naturally, as students of the subject, we did not share in that opinion and considered our work more compelling. Having said that, I will not deny the sudden wave of curiosity that came over me when I heard Eric, Joseph, and Eli shout with delight. Indeed, I rushed over to see what it was that caused them to cheer. The other climatologists and even our guides ran over to see as well. Approximately 100 yards from where we had parked the cars was a strange depression in the earth. Yadoma is often marked by depressions known as alas, which form due to repeated melting and freezing. However, such depressions are never so pronounced as the one Eric and his secondary team stumbled upon. In my eyes, which I must admit are not trained to classify such geographical formations, the thing appeared to be a crater. Judging by the levels of erosion at the crater's edge and the amount of dirt and snow that filled its trough, the crater had formed many thousands of years ago. Now then, if I were to ask you what we found at the center of the crater, presumably, you would say a meteorite, though Greenways would not have hired an archaeologist to investigate such a find, would they? No. And as I, standing on the rim of the crater, watched Eli stroke the spine of that great black tome, I failed to see how any book could aid them in finding a meteorite. Nor could I reason why, having found the crash site, he still clung religiously to it as if it were the Lord's holy testaments. No. At the center of the crater was not a meteorite. It was the artifact Eric had mentioned. For some time, I did not see it for myself. Joseph, either purposefully or otherwise, blocked our view as he dug away the dirt and snow piled on by centuries. This was not such a hard task, given the poor state of Yakutia's precious permafrost. Nonetheless, we waited impatiently for the artifact to reveal itself to us. And when Joseph finally threw down his shovel, I descended into the crater to take a closer look. Artifact was not the word you would have chosen, for the thing seemed more like a monument. It was a perfect cylinder, unaffected by erosion. Its surface was smooth except for a pair of helices that encircled the artifact and crossed each other at increasing intervals as you neared its base. Centered at the top of the artifact was an orifice of sorts surrounded by 3 curved blades. The purpose and location of this relic were perplexing even to Eli and Joseph. However, the composition of the find had all of us scratching our heads. The artifact was rigid and unyielding, and its color was pale and gray. The thing was horrible to look at, and immediately called to mind images of cadavers stiffened by rigor mortis. Moreover, clinging to the relic's base was a web of some sort, blackened at the tips as if charred. At first glance, it appeared to be some sort of vegetative growth with vine-like tendrils expanding outward. However, at second glance, the vines more closely resembled veins. As it turned out, this growth was not firmly attached to the relic. Joseph cut off a piece and sealed it in a vial. While I marveled at the inexplicable find, a concerning thought materialized in my head. The most effective way for me to explain this notion is to compare it to the sensation one feels while standing near the edge of a cliff. As you stare down that spine-chilling height, a voice in your head tells you to jump. No doubt the fall would kill you. That thought has no reason to enter your head at such an inopportune time, yet it appears anyway, naturally. And so, when I thought of plunging my hand into the relic's blade-lined orifice, I dismissed the thought as a natural one. As I shook off this thought, I looked around at the others in our ragtag team. They were transfixed by the artifact. Whatever the thoughts that passed through their head, they looked on with undue interest, as if the fleshy monument were a gruesome car crash with no survivors. Madeline passed around her bottle of wine and offered a toast to their great discovery. It wasn't long before all pretenses of our mission were dropped. Eric became consumed by his interest in the relic. When I shared some of our preliminary data about the permafrost, he completely brushed me off. When I asked the navigators where we would be heading next, they simply shook their heads and shrugged. No directions were given. No plans were shared. So I broached the subject with Eric as delicately as I could. My team had collected all the data we needed from the location and were ready to move. The very notion of leaving the relic behind infuriated Eric. He flew into a manic state, the likes of which I have never seen anyone enter before. He cursed me out, called me selfish, ignorant, and inferior, and balled his fists so tight I thought they'd pop. We would not leave. None of us. Not until they had studied the artifact to the fullest extent. If my thoughts were not related to the artifact, he did not want to hear it. The encounter was disturbing, to say the least. However, I found that everyone had entered a queer sort of state. Ulrich and Madeline grew melancholy and Igor anxious. The guides huddled close to one another, rarely leaving their tents as if lost in a world that terrified them. Meanwhile, Eli circled the artifact every evening and read passages from his book, which he was never seen without. Worst affected, though, was Joseph. He spent almost all his time digging holes by the relic. The temperature had dropped considerably since we had reached the site, so this proved troublesome. Nonetheless, he dug all day until his hands were raw and his head dripped with sweat. At night, he slept in a tent just feet from the relic. I am uncertain what ideas had infected his head, but he seemed desperate to find something more than just that brutal monument. All the while, he talked aloud to himself. By the sound of it, he was having entire conversations, even pausing for a response. Not that I ever heard one. These conversations were mostly civil. With Eric, however, it was a different story. At times, I could hear them argue over the relic. Their voices reached such incredible volumes I was certain their disagreements would erupt in violence. How could anyone get so worked up over such a hideous creation? And what about? I had no idea. But it was only a matter of time before their frequent bickering escalated. One evening, a fight broke out. I was eating a pathetic dinner of chicken and buckwheat when I heard a pair of enraged screams. Upon arrival at the scene, I saw Eric and Joseph exchanging punches until both of their faces were streaming with blood. Eli, still gripping his holy black book, attempted to pull Joseph back, but with little success. Both of the guides jumped in to pull Joseph back, but the massive specimen of a man still thrashed his arms around in defiance. As he did so, I saw him swinging a jug of gasoline in his left hand. Slowly, I pieced together that Joseph had a change of heart, and quite a significant one. The relic did not need to be studied. Rather, in his eyes, it needed to be burned. I, of course, had no investment in the artifact, but it seemed a waste to let Joseph destroy it, after everyone's hemming and hawing over the revolting thing. So, I joined the effort to restrain Joseph. Together, we wrested the gasoline from his hand and tied him to the post inside his tent. Poor Joseph looked dreadful. His face was shockingly pale and gaunt, as if the skin was melting off his body. Since I did not often socialize with the man, I had no frame of reference. But I remember thinking his body was too long. The proportions just appeared off. In any case, I was more concerned with Joseph's sanity. He babbled endlessly about flesh and blood and some nameless man he referred to simply as him. When it became clear to Joseph that none of us understood what he was saying, he began to mutter about losing control. Naturally, we thought he was referring to the brawl, but that wasn't exactly the case. Once Joseph had settled down a bit, I returned to my tent to rest. The whole incident had drained me, and I did not even have the strength to finish my dinner. Unfortunately, my hopes for a restorative sleep were entirely misplaced. That night, I found myself soaring through distorted dreamscapes cloaked in red shadow. I tumbled down mountains of maddening heights, their great stone bodies lined with pumping black veins. And the world of our age was shattered so violently that no semblance of its former self could ever be reclaimed. In that hellish landscape, a voice spoke to me. So deep and booming was that voice that I took it to be of the world itself. "Answer my call and obey," the voice said. "Make this world as all were meant to be." I awoke in a hot sweat, disturbed in part by the dream itself but also by a growing commotion outside. No doubt Joseph was to blame. I could only assume he had escaped his bonds during the night and was continuing his plans to destroy the artifact. As I have already said, I had no investment in the artifact, so I considered leaving the others to resolve the issue on there. But my curiosity overcame me, and I could not have fallen asleep again if I had tried. What's more, I heard someone shout something no one hopes to hear. "Get the gun!" My first instinct was to say a bear had entered camp. After all, that was why firearms were brought on the expedition in the first place. Poor Joseph, I thought to myself, seeing a crowd gathered at the mouth of his tent. We had served him to a bear on a platter by tying him up like that. I rushed over to join them, but I did not see a bear. I saw something far worse. Joseph remained tied to his post. He was screaming something dreadful as though overcome with agony, rage, or a mix of the two. Desperate to get to the artifact, he begged for freedom. He promised not to harm it. He just wanted to touch it. However, innocuous words aside, no sane individual would have released Joseph. What I found in that tent was beyond description, though I will do my best for your sake. Simply put, Joseph had mutated into something inhuman. His limbs had stretched beyond the length of his body as if to slip out of his bonds. They narrowed and split into an array of fleshy tentacles, whose razor-keen edges glistened in the starlight. Likewise, his skull had grown thin and oblong. A fissure ran from the base of his head to the tip of his hairline. Even now I can hear the sickening crack of his skull as it split open and gushed blood. Ulrich, who I had not known as a holy man, crossed himself and prayed. Madeline retched on her shoes and ran away in disgust. The rest of us simply stood in a state of fearful wonder. The brain cannot comprehend that for which it has no reference. Whatever Joseph had become was not of our world, and so it paralyzed us to look on him. Our guides arrived on the scene in short order. One carried a rifle while the other carried the jug of gasoline. If the bullets didn't kill him, perhaps fire would. However, contrary to our beliefs, Joseph had not entirely lost his sanity. He was still lucid enough to fear death. Screaming, Joseph lashed out with his mutated appendages. As the guide with the rifle approached, one of the fleshy tendrils caught him by the leg. Blood spurted everywhere as the honed tentacle burrowed into his flesh. A second tentacle slashed him across the chest, cutting clean to the bone. Dead or nearly so, the guide dropped the rifle. While Joseph flung the guide's limp body overhead, the second guide opened the jug of gasoline and poured it all over. Narrowly dodging a tendril, the guide pulled out a lighter and threw it into the tent. At once, the whole thing went up in flames and Joseph shrieked in agony. Eric, who had grabbed the rifle, fired 3 shots. The first 2 hit Joseph in the chest. He wailed and thrashed outward with his flaming limbs. I heard his restraint snap and feared for my life, but the third shot hit Joseph in the head, and he stumbled back, muttering about the artifact with his dying breath. For some time we watched the tent burn and Joseph along with it. I cannot recall what thoughts passed through my head, if any passed at all. How can one process such horrors with a complete grip on their rational faculties? Rationality had left us all behind. The only thing left to do was gawk like idiots. Eric was the first to turn away from Joseph's smoldering corpse. Notably, the rifle remained in his grasp. He paced around the campsite, glancing all the while at the fleshy monument. Frightened by his agitated behavior, I backed away slowly from the scene. But Igor caught me under the arm and pulled me towards our armed director. I was his moral support. "What in the hell is going on here?" he asked. Madeline, who had finished emptying the contents of her stomach, joined Igor in his anger. "This was never about the Yadoma, was it?" she said. Even Ulrich spoke up. "You owe us an explanation," he said. Understandably, our remaining guide was the least forgiving of Eric's secrecy. His friend had died for a mission none of us fully understood. If not for the gun in Eric's hands, I believe the guide would have paid blood with blood. Instead, he could only curse and stomp around in anger. Silent as the night, Eli appeared beside us with his book in hand. He adjusted his glasses and sighed from deep within his chest. "If you won't tell them," he said to Eric, "then I suppose I will." "Eli, we swore to—" "Someone is dead, Eric. Let them hear the truth." "Very well. But the mission does not change," he said. In a calm, calculated manner, Eli proceeded to tell us how the entire climate mission was a cover for PR purposes. We had expected as much and agreed that Greenway's shareholders would not be thrilled to hear about their energy company partaking in meaningless archaeological expeditions. However, as Eli explained in excessively reasonable and measured terms, there was a meaning behind their venture. To emphasize his point, he held up the black leather-bound book. The great Gothic tome was, he claimed, the demon's grimoire. Not a translation, not a copy, but the very book of legend. Doubtlessly, you need no reminder of the stories. All who glimpse its pages are destined for a terrible and gruesome end. So, you can imagine the murmur that ran through the lot of us. Whether or not we believed Eli was beside the point. The truth had already taken a rotten turn. However, determined to explain himself, Eli continued. The stories we had heard about the book were simply that. If he was to be believed, the demon's grimoire contained a great wealth of knowledge about what the world was and could be, knowledge supposedly passed down by godly beings from beyond. As it pertained to their expedition, the grimoire spoke of an ancient city built by the gods themselves. The book did not say where exactly this city was located, however. That revelation came in a dream. According to Eli, he, Eric, and Joseph shared this very same dream on the very same night after reading the demon's grimoire together one evening. It was then a voice shared with them the coordinates of the city, adding that he was sleeping there. This mysterious voice could only belong to one of the gods. After all, how else could they each have been contacted in the same way at the same time? I looked at Eric, who was still sulking with a rifle in hand. He nodded to confirm it was true. Having suspended my disbelief, I still found one glaring issue in Eli's story. We had traveled to the divinely given coordinates and found no city or sleeping god. Instead, we had found a monument, nothing beside remained. When I said as much, Eli seemed troubled, and Eric even more so. "It must be here," our director said. "We will not leave until we find it." "And Joseph?" Igor asked. "Yes, what of Joseph?" I thought. Joseph himself had heard his God's call and come running to the desolate tundra to receive his blessings. Instead, he was treated to madness and mutation, neither of which I could accurately explain. Unfortunately, neither Eli nor Eric could explain it either. Their blank and distant stares offered little comfort to those of us that wanted to leave. Still, the mission was not finished. On the contrary, Eric decided to accelerate excavation with controlled explosions of ammonium nitrate. Offering our gun-toting leader all due respect, I objected to this idea. Naturally, I was overruled. Eric detonated one explosive before realizing his mistake. The ammonium nitrate ignited a pocket of methane, of which there are many in Yakutia's, thawing permafrost, and burst into a massive ball of flame. In addition to nearly killing Eric, the explosion also came dangerously close to the relic. Fractures ran through the ground, which shifted under the revolting artifact. One more explosive, and he was likely to return it underground, where it rightfully belonged. Eric had no choice but to continue Joseph's work with the shovel. and a load of good it did. After days of work, he had not found a single sign of the ancient city or his god. It was obvious to me, as I am sure it is to you, there was no city to be found. Even so, people were growing restless. Madeline and Ulrich joined Eric and Eli in their search, if only to get home sooner. But the work seemed to sap the very life force out of them. In a matter of hours, I noticed a severe decline in their health and mood. More and more they resembled Joseph before his imminent demise. Their faces had grown long and pale, sweat dripped from their willowy bodies, and madness slipped into their speech. Infighting and outbursts became all too common. Igor, too, grew quick. To anger, but I suppose it was out of fear. He had noticed the group's decline and feared their transformation into monsters like Joseph had become. Although the notion disturbed me as well, the thought of leaving, for whatever reason, absolutely roiled the acid in my gut. I found myself searching for excuses to continue the search, though I had no logical reason to do so. It was then I developed a theory, baseless though not impossible, about what had happened to Joseph and what was happening to all of us. Imprisoned in the permafrost was more than just methane. It has been said by some academics that bacteria and viruses of forgotten ages may also lie dormant in the frozen earth. Perhaps by breaking up the ground, we had released a plague upon ourselves. If this were the case, it would be reckless to return to society. Our only choice was to stay. Even as I shared the theory, I felt my intuition scream in protest. A sickness lay on us, that much was certain. Whether or not it was natural, however, I could not say. No pathogen I knew of could do what it did to Joseph. But the others accepted my theory without complaint. I suppose the alternative, the truth, was even more frightening. So, like it or not, everyone agreed to stay and doom ourselves to the very same fate that took Joseph. Next to deteriorate was Eli. According to Madeleine's count, he was shuffling in a spiral around the fleshy monument like water around a drain. Though she called out to him, he could not hear or see anything beyond the relic. So blind was he to the world around him that he fell face first into a hole. Upon pulling him out, Madeleine found him burning with a fever and muttering senselessly. By the time I saw Eli, he was already in another world entirely. We wrapped him in a blanket and lay a moist cloth over his head. It did nothing to sober his deepening state of insanity. He muttered ceaselessly about the body and blood and the cleansing of earth. I found the chatter quite ominous, but Eli's physical transformations repulsed me to an even greater extent. His limbs drooped while his arteries bulged against his taut skin. Bloody tears ran down his cheek, and his pupils dilated until they consumed the entirety of his eye. As I backed out of the tent, I heard the stuttering growl of an engine revving. Without hesitation, Eric bolted after the car, shouting hysterically. I heard the crack of his rifle and the sound of the car skidding to a stop. After a moment of brief silence, the rifle fired again. I looked around the camp and determined the guide had stolen the car. Now he was dead. Feeling a rising sickness in my gut, I returned to my tent. Igor was there waiting for me with a look of desperation on his face. "It is the artifact," he said. "We need to destroy it." "Eric will not like that," I said. "It has poisoned us. We will not be free until it is gone." Igor continued. "You must help me. Tonight we will use the ammonium nitrate." Igor's plan struck me as the most sensible thing I had heard throughout the entire expedition. If there was one common thread running through our troubles, it was that terrible monument of madness. Still, I resisted. "I am afraid I don't feel comfortable with explosives," I said. Igor protested vehemently. Destroying the artifact was a necessity for all of us. If we did not do it now, then we would not get the opportunity again. Madness would take us before long. I assumed he was right, but I could not bring myself to join him. "I cannot," I told him, "but I will not stop you either. Do what you must. I won't tell anyone." Disappointed, though unsurprised, Igor returned to his tent. Exhausted by the troubling sequence of events, I went to sleep. With luck, the nightmare would be over by the time I woke up. But sleep had its own nightmares to offer. Again, I found myself amid a shattered world of bleeding shadow. And again, a voice called to me. "Hear me and obey," it said. Its dark, tortured timbre shook the very fabric of my dream. Be my city of body and blood. I awoke in a sweat. For several moments, the voice's echo lingered between my ears. Gasping for air, I sat up and stared ahead. Just then, a silhouette passed by the entrance to my tent. It was still nighttime, so I could only assume it was Igor about to enact his plan. Rather than lie in wait for an explosion to startle me, I got up to follow him. But it was not Igor sulking through the darkness. It was Eli. If not for his glasses, I would not have recognized him. The man's rotund belly had caved in as his back had hunched over. His sinking arms had taken on a vegetative texture like dusky roots reaching ever downward with bristly hairs, feeling for sustenance. The skin below his eyes drooped down an inch, showing a long stretch of moist, pink flesh that glistened in the starlight. Notably, Eli's black book was missing. Only a madman would approach him, and that I had not yet become. Instead, I sated my curiosity by following from a distance. I watched Eli slink down the crater towards the relic. Apparently, he was conscious enough to avoid the holes his team had dug, for this time he wove around them without so much as a glance. His focus was singular. Slowly, deliberately, he made his way to the relic. Although I hadn't the slightest notion what might happen when Eli reached the relic, the darker recesses of my mind waited with much excitement. I even felt a small flutter in my chest, as if my subconscious were cheering for that very moment. Yet, in my heart of hearts, I knew the result could not be good. After what I had seen in Yakutia, the only reasonable expectation was one of horror. There was a brief pause after Eli reached the relic. Eyes twitching, he stared at the bladed orifice in the monument. Whatever humanity remained in him resisted with all its waning strength, but in the end, it gave out. Without warning, Eli slammed, his head into the artifact again and again. The 3 curved blades dug into his skin and his eyes. Skin ripped and blood poured as his flesh caught on the artifact. This was his sacrifice to the god of his dreams, and the sacrifice was accepted. The monument latched onto his face, absorbing it into its grisly architecture. Eli's body expanded, losing all form and definition. He became a sheet of writhing flesh that smothered the cold, dense earth. Black veins forked through his stretched tissue as it reached for yards in every direction. Terror and revulsion swallowed whatever curiosity lingered inside me. I stood, dumbstruck, grasping for words to make sense of what I had seen. Not far off, Igor jogged towards me. He carried a bag of ammonium nitrate in one hand and a small detonator in the other. His stupefied expression reflected mine perfectly. "Do you see?" he said. "We have to destroy it." I was in complete agreement, yet it pained me to say so. How could I cling to that horrid abomination after what I had seen? How could any part of me resist what I knew was necessary? "Answer my call," I heard as a whisper in my head. I stumbled as my vision dizzied. "Join me," it spoke in waking reality. "Are you all right?" Igor asked. "Yes," I lied. "Do it. We must do it." Igor started towards the fleshy artifact when a shot rang behind me. Instinctively, I ducked to avoid harm. When I looked back, I saw Eric standing over me with his rifle smoking. Thankfully, I was unharmed. Igor, however, fell to his knee. Blood streamed as it ran in hot streams down his leg. "It is what he wants," Eric said. "You can't interfere. I won't let you." He ran into the crater as Igor stumbled to his feet. With the butt of his gun, Eric beat Igor over the head once, twice, 3 times. After the 3rd blow, the detonator fell from his hand. Against my better judgment and the voice clawing at the edge of my hearing, I rushed to grab it. I succeeded in this endeavor and in drawing Eric's attention. Seizing the opportunity, Igor limped towards the monument with the ammonium nitrate in hand. Eric did not so much as look. Somehow he knew Igor's fate was already sealed. As soon as Igor approached the expanse of undulating flesh, a tentacle sprung out. It wrapped around his neck and pulled him forward. At once, Igor dropped the explosives and dug his hands into the dirt. But the veiny tendril dragged him without burden, and already blood spilled from his throat. I could smell the iron in the air. In a matter of seconds, the blanket of flesh consumed him. Igor screamed in a gut-wrenching tone, but only for a moment. Once his body melded into the collective, the throbbing mass expanded, forming strange geometric pillars that appeared designed by some cruel and twisted architect. With eyes glossy and forked with veins, Eric looked at me and grimaced. His nostrils flared and his lip twitched. All the while, a crack carved a path through his brow. Bulbous red tumors pushed through the fissure, forming into eyes and mouths and bones. I heard the voice again, this time from Eric's own lips. "Why do you resist me?" it said. Eric threw away the gun in a threatening display of confidence. Behind him, I could see the mutated figure of Ulrich haul a screaming Madeleine to the monument. Together, they fell into the mass of sculpted meat and blood. Madeleine's shouts darkened and stuttered as her face was absorbed into the hole. Ulrich melted without a sound. Their sacrifices fed the monstrous city of flesh, which spread to unexpected heights. Once all there was, the horrid monument now seemed a simple stroke on a canvas of ever-expanding horrors. "Do you not understand?" the voice said. "Already my signal rolls across the land, infecting the minds of every living thing. They will join to me, and we will grow until the world is alive with flesh and blood. Who are you to stop me? The earth is thawed. I cannot be buried now. I was no one." The more its words seeped into my head, the more it seemed so. I was a servant, a slave, a sacrificial lamb. My body was forfeit and my mind incommensurate with the grandeur of my God. Eric grabbed me by the ankle and dragged me forward to join. The rest, I was inclined to let him. Yet as I approached my imminent death, I saw the explosives lying where Igor had left them, just inches from the corporeal city. In my fleeting identity, I roused the last of my will and remembered the simple plan Igor had formed. As I triggered the detonator, I hoped the god was wrong. Perhaps he could still be buried. Igniting upon an underlying pocket of methane, the ammonium nitrate exploded in a glorious blast of fire. Fragments of flesh and bone erupted outward, and blood rained from the sky. Tremors shook the earth and the ground fell inward. I scrambled manically to get out in time. Eric was not so lucky. Where he once stood, I now saw a cloud of dust and a splatter of red. As for the artifact, I could not say whether it was buried or destroyed. It was nowhere to be seen, and frankly, that was the only comfort I needed. The god's voice fell silent, and my sanity flooded back to me. I took one of the jeeps and fled that cursed place with reckless abandon, and so it was that I returned to you, the lone survivor of a living nightmare. For some time I endured that truth in silence, suffering your twisted conspiracy theories and pointed accusations. I did it for you so the truth could never lead you to such cruel terrors as I had experienced. Yet you have beaten me beyond my patience. If you could not keep quiet, I reasoned, then no longer could I. Now take my honest account and put your curiosity to rest, because it can only do you harm. Bury it, so you should never think to look for it again. Please, for all our sakes. Algonquin legends say the Wendigo was once a man like you and me. Poisoned by greed and gluttony, the man turned into a pale, gaunt creature with sunken eyes, reaching limbs, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Always hungry, the Wendigo searched constantly for its next meal. The truth, however, is much worse. My name is Charles Keeper, and I was an investigative reporter for a local paper in Wisconsin. If that sounds impressive, then you have the completely wrong idea about my career. Mostly they sent me out to the middle of nowhere to investigate supernatural events and creatures. Half of the people I talked to were pulling their bullshit stories out of their ass, and the other half were hopelessly deluded. Not exactly a perfect job. But hey, whatever puts food on the table, right? My last investigation brought me to a small town nestled deep in the northern forests of Wisconsin. So the curious among you do not seek out this town. I will omit its name. Trust me, it's for your own good. In any case, the remote settlement made a small buzz after a young man living with his mother reported 2 grisly murders. One he committed himself, and another he claimed was the work of the Wendigo. The man, who I shall simply call Robert, told authorities he heard a scream while hunting one evening. Following the noise down one game trail, he found his neighbor half-eaten while a skeletal white creature stood over him covered in blood and gore. Robert shot several rounds into the creature and then burned its body. The body of the Wendigo was later identified as that of a man who had gone missing almost 15 years prior. Robert never stood trial. To get a closer look at the full story, I first met with Robert at his home. I realized it might not be the smartest idea to visit a confessed murderer on his own property. However, I made certain his mother would join us. Even a crazed killer would not hurt an innocent reporter in front of his mother, or so I told myself anyway. Their home was a shack battered and broken by time. Dust fogged the windows, and weeds strangled the rickety porch. The front door, where Robert waited eagerly for me, hung at an angle and swung to even the gentlest breeze. "You're here," Robert said. He sounded surprised, but pleasantly so. His lips curled into a wide, yellow-toothed smile, and then faltered, falling into a gloomy frown. We shook hands and headed into the living room to talk. The room smelled of spilled beer and old deli meat. Robert invited me to sit on the couch, no doubt the source of the dizzying stench. "I didn't plan on staying long. Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said. "I know what you went through must have been difficult, so I won't pry too deep. But please, if you would, recount that day for me in as much detail as you're comfortable with. Our readers are eager to hear the truth." Robert shrugged. "Isn't anything. People deserve the truth, even if it's hard to hear." I couldn't agree more, I said. I forced a smile. "Truth be told, I'm just happy someone wants to hear my story," he said. "The newspapers, you read them? They're making me out as some lunatic killer." "Well, I work for a newspaper," I said, "but we're dedicated to all sides of the story. That includes your side, so whenever you're ready." I pulled out a notebook and pen. Scratching his head, Robert glanced up and to the side. His brow scrunched together as he struggled to recall his story. Real or fake? I didn't know or care. After some time, Robert shrugged again. "Nothing special about that day," he said. "I went out hunting. There are some game trails back through the woods there. Didn't find anything, of course, and night came all quick-like, so I was just heading home. And that's when you found your neighbor in the..." He nodded. "Wasn't 3 yards from the backyard, if you can believe it." I couldn't. At first, I didn't see anything. Like I said, night came all quick-like. Clouds all across. The sky, so not a moon or star to see. But I heard it. He made an unsettling sound like a dog gnawing on a bone. Then down the path I shine my flashlight. I see it. And Kev. "Kev is your neighbor?" He nodded. "And the creature, the Wendigo," he corrected. "Yes, the Wendigo. What did it look like?" I asked. "It was tall with long white limbs. Its skin was stretched thin as if it didn't fit its bones. And its eyes, they were sunken in, you know, like big black pits. They were cold, dead. Nothing there but hunger and hate." His brow pinched together and his mouth fell open. Blood, too. Blood everywhere, on its arms, on its face, on its chest. And there Kev is. He cleared his throat and muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch it. God bless him. He was just torn to shreds, and that beast, the Wendigo, still had bits of him in its teeth. Well, I got my Ruger, and I pumped 5 shots in it. No hesitation. "You and Kev were close? Good guy. We hunted together on occasions. Ma says he went looking for me in the evening. He wanted to ask me something. Now I'll never know what," Robert said. He stared into the distance and said nothing. I was beginning to wonder where his mother was. So far she hadn't made an appearance, and the longer the silence lingered, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually I made a curt cough. "And the 5 shots, did they kill the creature?" "Seemed so. Howled something awful and fell to the ground," Robert said. "But I don't take any chances. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it, and I know the legends. Only fire can kill a Wendigo. So I ran back home, got some gasoline, and lit that fucker up." His face spread into a proud smile. I said. "The police identified the Wendigo as..." "Yeah, I know," Robert interrupted. "But I didn't know him. You..." Think it was this man or something else? I asked. Robert shrugged. Could be. They say the Wendigo used to be human. A small, shriveled woman shuffled into the living room. Ain't no human, she said in a harsh, combative tone. Ma, Robert said, I told you before, she said. Wendigo just means evil spirit. It isn't a human. I told you before, Robbie. You think it's a spirit? I asked his mother. I do, she said. You know how many people have gone missing over the past 50 years? 5. Christ, we only have 100 people in this town. Something isn't right with that forest. It isn't natural. You want my advice? Don't go near it, I chuckled. Funny you should say that. I was just about to ask if you'd show me where you found the Wendigo. I can show you where the game trail starts, Robert said. But even I won't go down that way again. You're not thinking of looking around, are you? His eyes twinkled with genuine concern. Robert may have been a murderer, but I could tell he truly believed the story he told me. I pitied him. You already killed the Wendigo. What do I have to fear? I said. The wrinkled old woman scowled. Don't go looking for trouble, she said, 'cause you'll find it, and you'll be sorry. A good reporter would follow up on the story with the police. If Robert's mother was right, the town had too many missing persons than could be explained. But I am not a good reporter. I wanted to go home. It didn't matter whether or not I got to the bottom of the story. My readers would still eat the garbage up anyway. So I went out into the woods looking for more Wendigos. One night in the forest, and I'd call the story finished. It's not like I expected to find anything. The forest was a forest. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Dead, brown leaves blanketed the floor while reaching. Black branches blinded the sky, and through the woods ran a winding dirt path where Robert used to hunt. After walking up and down the trail for an hour, a starless, moonless night had cast everything in shadow. So I made camp for the night. I set up a tent and lit a small fire to keep me warm. Once the flames grew tall and bright, I pulled out my notebook. Late in the evening, I heard strange noises. I wrote, rustling trees, muffled chatter. A shadow shifted among the silhouetted trees. It could have been a person or an animal, but the hair on my neck stood straight up. I didn't feel safe. None of it was true. I hadn't experienced anything outside of the forest's usual sights and sounds. The fire cracked. I sighed. I was tired of spending nights alone in the forest making up stories about fictional creatures. There are much better ways to spend one's time and make one's money. I was still young. Maybe I could switch newspapers and write something real for a change. I heard another crack. Then another. This time they hadn't come from the fire. I squinted into the dark forest. It had to be some kind of animal. All sorts came out at night to forage. Possums, raccoons, skunks, and so on. But as I searched into the woods, I saw the branches bend and snap. The animal was large. A coyote, perhaps. What else could it be? Leaves rustled. The sound was close. Whatever it was approaching the fire. I looked long and hard for the source of the noise, and soon I saw an inky shadow passing from tree to tree. Robert, I asked the dark figure, is that you? There was no answer. Robert! Nothing. Now I was growing afraid. Against all logic, I entertained the possibility that maybe Robert and his mother were right. Maybe there were such things as Wendigos and evil spirits. God, I hope not. Just in case, I grabbed a log and lit one end in the fire. Robert said only fire could kill a Wendigo. It was probably bullshit. But, better safe than sorry. Before long, the noises stopped. I waited and listened with the flaming log in hand. Minutes passed one after another, but the forest was silent. After several bated breaths, I relaxed. The campfire, which I had all but forgotten about, had burned down to its last embers. The dark coals smoldered faintly. So I placed my makeshift weapon on top and tried to coax the fire back to life. Just then I heard the crunch of leaves close behind me. I whirled around, but there was nothing. Only my tent trembling slightly to a cool breeze. I built the fire into a great blaze whose heat and light gave me strength. For hours I watched the flames dance and listened for any noise, big or small. Thankfully I heard nothing, and by the time the fire finally died, I was exhausted but calm. With my fears behind me, I headed into my tent to rest. It was then I saw it for the first time, the Wendigo. Its face, not at all human, was a pallid skull adorned with gnarled black antlers. To fit inside the tent, the towering creature hunched over its limbs. But its body was not pale or emaciated as Robert had described. At one look, it was solid, black flesh with muscles wide and bulging. And at the next, it was a gossamer fog. However, I didn't get to look too long before it knocked me out cold with a swipe to the head. I woke in a dingy cave with a raging headache and a chill running down my spine. I was naked, bound to a rock slab and utterly terrified. Beside me were two other slabs, each with a pale, naked body on them. Even in the dark, I could see the curve of their bones pressing so tight against their skin I thought it might burst. They were dead. They had to be. Yet when I called out for help, the two bodies stirred suddenly as if waking from sleep. You're alive. Oh, thank God, I said. Where are we? How long have you been here? What's happening? For all my questions, I only received anxious grunts and groans in response. The two people craned their necks to look at me. When I saw their faces, I shrieked in horror. They weren't people, not anymore. Their eyes had receded into their skull, and their teeth had narrowed to beastly points. Bloody sores spotted their hairless scalps, and scars marked their gaunt cheeks. When they looked at me, they gnashed their teeth and licked their tattered lips. I had no doubts. Robert had seen one of these creatures, but why were they tied up? And what was the creature I saw in my tent? I didn't know. All three stone slabs faced a long, gaping tunnel that stabbed deep into the hillside, far from the touch of light. I strained to see its end, yet I could see nothing. And as I looked deeper into the tunnel, I saw a white skull, and black antlers emerge silently. Hey, I said. Who are you? What do you want? The creature eyed me with a hollow stare and then sank back into the darkness. My heart raced in my chest as I struggled against my restraints, but they would not budge. I felt around for something to help me escape, but the ropes pressed down on my wrists. I could only reach fruitlessly with the tips of my fingers. No, I muttered in a shrill, frantic voice. No, please, help me. Help! My breaths grew short and shallow until my lungs trembled. No matter how hard I gasped, I couldn't get enough air. Soon, my vision spun and went black. When next I woke up, I found my captor seated on a rock. Though it had no eyes to blink, the creature was staring at me. What do you want? I asked. It cocked its head to one side but said nothing. You aren't human. What are you? A ghost? A spirit? The creature grumbled low in its throat. A spirit, is that it? The creature murmured in a deep, guttural voice. Whatever words it spoke, it was no language I had heard before. A demon? A Wendigo or something? Wendigo? It said in a menacing tone. The Wendigo stood and approached me. It lowered its hand towards my bare chest and then growled. Then, pulling its hand back, the Wendigo turned and walked towards the next captive. The pale beast on the table was already squirming with anticipation. Food must starve, it said as it scanned the captive's willowy body. I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. I hurled another barrage of questions at the Wendigo, but this time it ignored me. From out of thin air, the Wendigo produced a short steel knife. Without hesitation, he pressed the keen blade against the captive's sickly white skin. The beast wailed in pain as the Wendigo shaved off a sliver of skin. But when the deed was done, the bony creature raised its head. Mouth agape, it stretched towards the slice of flesh like a flower to the sun. Then, chanting, the Wendigo fed its prisoner. In an instant, the meager strip of skin was gone, consumed without second thought. But the chants continued for several moments more, and when they finally ended, the pale beast began to whimper. It shrank in on itself and trembled visibly. Delighting in its fear, the Wendigo chuckled. Then, after a long, disturbingly silent moment, the Wendigo thrust its hands into the beast's stomach. Soon the cave filled with the victim's shrieks of horror and pain and the Wendigo's moans of pleasure. I closed my eyes, too scared to watch. Several minutes passed before the screams finally died down. I cracked open my eyes. Somehow the pale creature's stomach was untouched. Even so, it continued to writhe on the slab, traumatized and in agony. As for the Wendigo, it had moved on to the next victim. Cruel laughter rumbled low in the cave, accented by the shrill whimpers of the imprisoned. The ritual was about to begin again. I heard the cry of steel and of pain and of pleasure. Organs squished and groaned, blood sloshed and spilled. All the while I wondered when it would be my turn to suffer under the Wendigo's touch. However, when the Wendigo finished, it merely turned and disappeared down the tunnel. It was not yet my time. Time, they say, is relative. And in that cave, with no light to signal the day, it could have been days, weeks, or even months that I stayed strapped to that stone. Hunger gnawed at my belly, aching worse than anything I've ever felt before. At times, I caught the Wendigo watching me from the shadows as if waiting for something. But he didn't say or do anything. He continued to torture the other prisoners, but not me. After that, he returned to the tunnel and disappeared for hours on end. With the Wendigo gone, I searched for some way to free myself, but I could think of nothing. One day I heard the wind howl from somewhere behind me. Another day I heard rain patter gently against stone. The exit couldn't have been too far away, but still too far from reach. In time, the pain of starvation became so unbearable that I could think only of food. I even chewed off the dried flakes of my lips in a desperate attempt to fill my belly, but it didn't even touch my hunger. God, I would have eaten anything if you put it in front of me. Of course, this was exactly what the Wendigo was waiting for. Food must starve, it had said. It didn't take long to figure out what that meant. I had watched the Wendigo enough to know it wasn't torturing the other prisoners. It was feeding off their pain, their starvation, their hunger. When the Wendigo stood before me one day, I knew it was time. I had starved enough. My heart quaked when I felt the Wendigo's short steel blade, but I suffered the pain with pride. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. The Wendigo had not broken me yet, and when my flesh was forced into my mouth, I spit it back out at the cruel spirit. However, the Wendigo didn't care. It hacked off another chunk of meat, grabbed my jaw in a firm grip, and shoved the flesh down my throat. As I swallowed my pride and flesh both, the Wendigo muttered in its demonic tongue. The words meant nothing to me. Even so, I felt a strange sensation seep into my veins as if my achy, unrelenting hunger had expanded out of my stomach and into the rest of my body. While I pondered what was happening to me, the Wendigo forced its hands into my abdomen. Its fingers throbbed as they wrapped around my stomach, twisting it and tearing it open. My entrails surrendered to the Wendigo, bursting under its strong grip. The pain was unimaginable. I roared in agony while the Wendigo moaned in delight. No man or woman should have to endure what I did. Worse than the pain and the Wendigo's pleasure was the knowledge I could do nothing to stop it. I was helpless, not just then, but for years. I thought I would grow accustomed to the torture, resign myself to it. But pain is a funny thing. When you feel it intense enough and often enough, you don't grow numb to it. You grow more sensitive. It traumatizes you. Every moment of every day you fear it, scared and helpless. That's what I was for so many years. You may wonder how I survived so long on just meager scraps carved from my body. The Wendigo did something to me and the others. Call it a spell or a curse or whatever you want. But I survived. I survived. And I starved, so the Wendigo could feed for years to come. What that creature did, it changed me. Slowly, almost without notice, I became like the other prisoners. My hair fell out, my eyes sank into my skull, and my skin drained of all color. Even my thoughts had started to disappear, consumed by an irresistible, insatiable hunger. I could only cling desperately to my humanity. I forced myself to recall my favorite songs, my hobbies, and my family's faces. But it was all fading so fast. Soon I knew. Soon there would be nothing. What's more, I heard things. Deep within the lightless tunnel, Thin, ghostly voices murmured and growled. I caught only the echo of their words, but it was enough to convince me I had truly gone mad. Regardless, I did escape that cave eventually. That fateful day began not with my freedom, however, but with the freedom of another. Some time after feeding, when the Wendigo had returned to its tunnel, one of the prisoners rose from its slab. With a jagged rock in hand, it walked to the center of the cave and looked at the path behind me, where a soft wind murmured. I could barely believe it. Of course it was possible. After all, Robert had seen and killed one of these creatures. But how many years had I been there? How many years had it been there? If there was hope for that poor beast, then maybe there was hope for me. Maybe it would even let me go. As the pale creature walked past me towards the exit, I opened my mouth to call for its attention. Nothing came out but a dry croak. After all those years without speech, my body barely remembered how to do it. I poured all my strength into my throat and tried again. Please, was all I could muster. It was enough. The creature turned around and approached my slab. Some humanity lingered in the beast after all. It understood me. It pitied me. It would help me. Or so I thought. Still clutching the pointed rock, it looked down at me. For once, I could see its eyes clearly. They were utterly black. Its pupils had expanded until they consumed the entire cornea. Inside, I could see nothing. No thought, no emotion, only hunger. Mouth ajar, the beast grabbed my arm and lifted. The rock. All I could do was scream. Then, appearing suddenly, the Wendigo caught the creature's wrist. Without a word, the Wendigo dragged its prisoner back to the slab. Desperate to escape, the creature thrashed at its captor. It clawed and scraped and bit, though to no avail. The Wendigo took the abuse without complaint. In a last-ditch effort to free itself, the creature grabbed one of the Wendigo's antlers and pulled with all its might. A short, twisted chunk snapped off, making the Wendigo howl in pain. For an instant, the creature was free. However, it only managed to take a step before the Wendigo returned to its senses. With the back of its hand, the Wendigo struck its prisoner across the face. Keen, crooked teeth sprayed across the cave. They tinged against the cold stone like death bells ringing. Fueled by rage, the Wendigo thrust its hand through the creature's chest. Blood splattered over the prisoner beside me, who licked up the hot liquid without remorse. Now one prisoner short, the Wendigo sighed and muttered something in its ancient tongue. Then it grabbed the bloody corpse and dragged it into the tunnel. Halfway down, before disappearing from sight, the Wendigo stopped and looked back at me. A shiver ran down my spine. I clutched my fists tightly. In one of them was a tooth that fell like a miracle into my hand. I prayed to any god that would listen not to let that miracle be taken away. And perhaps one of them heard me, because the Wendigo turned around and sank into the darkness. Uncertain how long the Wendigo's absence would last, I waited. The tooth would be my key home, but I had to be smart. As I expected, the Wendigo returned shortly. It would not let a slab sit empty, so it slipped past me into the free world, where it would soon find another victim. After several anxious minutes, I began my work. The tooth I received was a molar. It wasn't sharp enough to cut a rope, so I honed it against the stone slab. It took hours to narrow the tooth to a razor-like point, and just as I began to saw through my rope binds, I heard the rustle of cloth against the cave floor. It was the Wendigo dragging its prey. This time it was a girl, blonde. In her mid-20s, I guessed. The Wendigo laid her against the slab and disrobed her. She was pretty. At one time, I may have looked at her with pleasure and desire, but at the time, all I could think of was how hungry I was. I held on to the sharpened tooth for another week or so, hiding it when necessary. Truth be told, I was too terrified to free myself. If I got caught, that was it. No more miracles. I would be stuck in that cave forever. I needed a distraction. One day, as the Wendigo carved a sliver of flesh from my thigh, a thin beam of light penetrated our chamber. The light was weak, as if it had come from somewhere far off, but it might as well have been the noontime sun. I hadn't seen light in decades. Although the light flickered and slipped away, The sound of footsteps echoed throughout the cave. As soon as it heard the sound, the Wendigo dropped its knife and vanished into its tunnel. What it feared, I couldn't say. Your guess is as good as mine, but it was an opportunity and I took it. I frantically dug the tooth into my rope binds. Not long after the footsteps, I heard the voices of 3 men calling out for someone. I didn't know the girl's name, but I could only assume they were looking for her. The ray of light flashed our way again, this time wider and stronger. I glanced at the girl. She struggled against her own binds, but to no avail. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Starvation had drained her of all energy. She was helpless, just as I had been so many times before. But not this time. This time I would be free. I hacked through my restraints even as the men's voices faded along with the thin, shifting light. Knees wobbly, I pushed myself to my feet. I gave one last look at the depthless black tunnel and left as quickly as my legs would allow. The whole time I wondered if the Wendigo would drag me back to the slab or kill me as it did the other prisoner. However, luck shone on me that day. After several minutes of raggedy breath and throbbing anxiety, I stumbled through the mouth of the cave into freedom. For a man that had not seen light in years, the moon and stars were blinding. And though I shielded my eyes from them, their presence gave me hope and comfort. Gaunt and naked, I ran through the woods in search of civilization. At some point, I collapsed from exhaustion, but when I woke again, I returned to running, bound by fear and hunger. It was midday when I found a dirt path that wove between the trees. I followed it until I came into contact with a young man on a hike. Naturally, his first response was to scream. "Please," I said. It was the one word I knew I could say, and this time the hiker responded with kindness and concern. Despite the horrific transformation I had undergone, he could still tell I was a person. Not just that, I was starving and covered in cuts and scars. "I'm sorry," the man said. "Do you need help? How can I help you?" I took a step closer. The man's cheeks were full and red with life, and along his neck ran a plump, juicy vein. I tried to speak, but this time only a hoarse grumble came out. "Water? Do you need water?" the man asked. He pulled out a plastic bottle from the bag strapped to his back. "Food," I said. I took another step closer. My heart roared in my ears. Or perhaps it was his heart I heard, beating strong behind his thick, meaty chest. A shiver ran down my spine. The man pulled a granola bar out of his backpack. "Here," he said. I reached forward to take it, but I didn't want granola, and I couldn't control myself. I tried. I swear I did. Yet even with the Wendigo far behind me, its influence lingered. I swatted away the granola bar and leapt at the man, scratching him across the neck. Blood coated my nails, and when I licked the dark drops, they tasted sweet as cream. Unbeknownst to me, the man had a knife. He stabbed it into my shoulder and then cut me across the cheek. The pain was no worse than what I had felt every day in that cave, but I didn't want to suffer anymore. I let go of the man and retreated into a fetal position. Meanwhile, the man ran to the cops, I presume, because sooner or later a group of police officers approached me with guns drawn. Not long after, I found myself in a cell, imprisoned again. At least this time I was clothed and fed. Of course, the police had questions, simple ones, for instance, "Who are you?" It took me a second, but I remembered. Charles Keeper," I said. They ran the name through their database. Then they came back with a photo. It was a photo of me. I looked so different, I barely recognized myself. Yet it was enough for the cops. "Jesus Christ," one of them said. "You've been missing for 15 years. 15, I repeated. It felt like 50. "What happened to you?" they asked. Their eyes studied me closely, never once letting up or looking away. I cowered on my knees. I said nothing. When the silence dragged on too long, they held up another photo. "Do you know this girl?" It was the girl from the cave. I flinched at the sight of her. "You do, don't you?" I looked up. It hurt to meet their gaze, but I met it anyway. "Please," I said. I didn't want to think about her. I didn't want to think about the Wendigo. please don't. I can't. Can't what? One cop asked. By the color of his face and the volume of his voice, I could tell he was angry. She's been missing a week. Her parents are worried sick. They want to know what happened to their baby, and you can't tell us? You won't, I stuttered. We won't believe you? Another cop finished. I nodded. Go on, try us. If you tell us where she is, maybe we'll... Forget about the man you assaulted in the forest, another cop added. I had no choice. They wouldn't let me leave until I told them, so I did. I told them everything. At times, I caught them looking among each other, thinking no doubt that I had gone mad. But on the whole, they were receptive. They tried to make sense of my story. Maybe the Wendigo was just a man in a costume. Maybe the trauma of my torture had altered my memories. In any case, 2 of the cops happened to be part of a search party that investigated the cave the night I escaped. Even if my story was a lie, it didn't matter so long as they found their missing girl in the cave. They asked me to help them find her. There were simply too many tunnels in the cave for them to find her on their own. But I refused outright. Nothing would bring me back to that cave. The thought of it triggered such a severe panic attack that they let me go without another word. Since then, I have readjusted to life, as best I can anyway. At first, food tasted sour, but for the most part, I've gotten used to it. I just take my steaks rare now. I found myself a lady too. She's decent and sweet, and she helps me forget about the times I suffered. She doesn't believe my story. I can sense it in the tone of her voice whenever the subject comes up. But she knows. Better than to tease me. As for the missing girl, the police never told me if they found her. I haven't heard anything from them since they released me. I hope they did find her. I really do. But in the many years that have passed, it never once occurred to me to find out. To tell you the truth, this is one story I don't want to see to the end. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it, and sung her to sleep, sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox, the missing pieces kept safe so that she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage, the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters the radiators bled rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it a home. My sister Annie mothered me. With lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals, she told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, the music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our pre-adolescent hips. She always let me shower first so that I could enjoy the hot water, and never complained when she had to make do with the cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe, like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age that we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she was radiant, and would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right, and she'd had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness, and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the back seat of the car coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was the mother and who was the daughter, radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavily, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed, with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never give us advance notice. One day we'd just wake up to an empty house with the fridge packed full, and a post-it note on its door, complete with a smear of Mom's lipstick in the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling, Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast all night, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food and the refrigerator went bare. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. It was the worst when Mom drank too much. She'd laugh too loudly and too long at anything and everything, until her mouth started to shake and she began to cry into her cereal at the breakfast table. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, going somewhere deep inside herself where no one could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5 years old, I'd cry when I'd find Mom passed out on her bed, sure she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears and tell me she was only sleeping, like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face, wiping the vomit from her mouth, and changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night, and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends, and that she hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip gloss and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd gotten the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane and ate the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness in the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, Annie and I weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, the gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I'd bent to pick her up, I felt her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too. I couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stared down at her, blonde hair hanging over her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. Then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we'd dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them, like pieces we could never put back. Outside, through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold. The clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching my sister on her knees picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, my stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, I forgave her more with every bite. Mom never cooked dinner, never remembered my favorite had been spaghetti since I was a kid, and never stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off, crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch. Or maybe even Lucky Strike, the cat that belonged to the junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles. But Annie always stopped me, saying once you started giving, they never stopped taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside, and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines, right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams will come true, said Annie with a grin. Then she stopped laughing, and her voice grew quiet, her face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy, let's wish. So we did. The sound of wailing interrupted us. It was closer this time and definitely human. We turned to one another in confusion. Annie shrugged and I squinted into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost, tired, and alone. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe. He walked around the back. Do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply. I sighed and rolled my eyes. Okay, I guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. Promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her with a smile. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own. Em, get inside now. She was staring out into the dark, past me, and opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the latch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I glimpsed what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence, someone was crouching with their knees tucked up neatly under his chin and his arms wrapped around his legs. His mouth was agape, softly opening and closing as he cried. Like a child lost in the dark. No, not like a child. More like someone pretending, mimicking the sound under cover of darkness. Suddenly they straightened their back, snapping upright, face still obscured by shadow. They were tall and slim, extraordinarily thin by human standards. Panic made me move, carried forward by animal instincts left over from a time when people still lived in nature. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly approached the house with long, deliberate strides. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder into the gloom. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt. Nails digging in, grounding herself. Looked down at our interlocked fingers, both of us born of the same bones. I'm going to call the cops, and everything is going to be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered. and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs charging. A soft tapping filled the silence. Annie turned wide-eyed to the window. It was the sound of someone's forehead slowly and repeatedly bumping against the glass. Then the blows accelerated, gaining in both speed and strength, skin meeting glass until they were slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. A moment later, the tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and a tremendous crash. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to shatter it. We ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time, skipping the rotted ones out of habit. I turned to look behind me once, and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of glass breaking echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom and locked the door. A weak mewling cry, like that of an infant calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and entryways. Annie threw her back against the door, her feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching a knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I joined her, shoulder to shoulder, and did the same. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, calculated and casual. The crying took on a mocking quality, resembling laughter, arriving in short, shrill bursts of sound followed by high-pitched giggling and then silence, only to start again a moment later. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. "What the fuck is going on?" I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't keep from falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room in the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough along the edge to draw blood. I watched a winding road of crimson rivulets cascading down her wrist. In spite of the pain, Annie continued pushing the blade into my hands. Finally, I took it from her. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched howl followed. I held my breath and felt my heart beating frantically in the base of my throat. "I'm going to get the phone from my room," my sister said. I shook my head dramatically in protest. Before I could say a word, Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. "Yes, I'm going to get the phone and I'm going to call the cops. We're going to be okay." I shook my head again. "It's the only way," Annie insisted. "When I go, I need you to lock the door, and I don't want you to open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me." I shook my head, and Annie pressed her hand against my mouth, pushing my teeth against my lips so forcefully it made my eyes water. "Promise me, Em." Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair from my face and gently tucked it behind my ear. "Promise," she mouthed, and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, the bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the darkened hall, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream ensued, followed by the handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop a screw loose. I watched it roll toward me on the tiles, and then everything went still. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. The silence continued. For a moment, the only sound was that of my breath slowly filling the room. A voice broke, the illusion of solitude. "Em?" A familiar voice came through the door. Startled, I gripped the knife even more firmly than before. "Honey, what's going on?" "Mom?" My voice cracked. "Mama, is that you?" I wrapped my arms around myself to keep from shaking. "Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door. It's okay, just let me in." The handle rattled again, gentler this time. "Just let me in. It's all okay." She banged impatiently on the door, and I took my handle of the bolt. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother, please. Her voice broke and she started to cry. Just let me in, baby. I'm so sorry. I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me as like she did when I was a kid, when I'd come in with a scraped knee after falling off the swings. Maybe this time she meant it. Perhaps it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Yeah, Emily, let us in. It's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt, and I tightened my grip on my weapon. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. Emily, let us in. Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, her voice growing louder and louder. Let us in, let us in, let us in, she shouted over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. Thought about bedtime stories and all the demons and monsters. We pray never crawl out from under our beds. That's not my sister, and you're not my mother. Screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub, curled into the fetal position, and clutched the knife to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that scolded me whenever I changed the TV channel, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound. And then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covered my eyes, and waited to die. A moment later, arms found me, lifted me from the tub, and carried me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was taken downstairs. Its exterior was covered in long, scraping claw marks, stretching to the floor. I found the hallway covered in the soft, downy remains of torn-up pillows, making it appear as if it had snowed indoors. I watched the tiny feathers drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been ripped apart by something feral. Outside, police cars and an ambulance waited in our driveway, and there, in the middle of it, all was Annie, bathed in blue and red light and glowing in the dark like a neon angel. I threw myself from the officer's shoulders and ran to her. Then I held us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we'd concocted. Muffled screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache. I understood. It turns out there was no demon. No wild animal or bad men were trying to break in. It was just Mom, out of her mind on booze, drugs, and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken, inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time, and then never get back up. Annie had seen her rail-thin frame in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth. Crack. Marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the alcohol I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found any, she went hunting for the stash hidden in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs on the other side of the door. She'd been so high she was able to mimic Annie's voice nearly perfectly. The real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that comes in a bottle or a needle, or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most, but it's up to you to let them in.